The ballroom fell silent the moment he spoke her name. Not a whisper, not a rustle of silk, just the sudden, suffocating weight of 200 pairs of eyes turning toward the woman no one had bothered to notice in 7 years. Elara Whitcombe stood frozen, her champagne glass halfway to her lips, as Lucian Ashford, Duke of Thornwick, the most powerful and feared man in England, crossed the marble floor toward her. Not toward the debutantes clustered like pastel flowers near the orchestra, not toward the widows draped in calculated elegance. Toward her, the invisible spinster in the corner. "Miss Whitcombe," he said, and his voice carried like a verdict. "Dance with me." It wasn't a request. Society held its breath, because everyone knew when the Duke of Thornwick finally chose to speak, nations trembled. And tonight, he had chosen her. If you want to see how a forgotten woman becomes the most dangerous player in London's ruthless game, stay until the end. Drop a like, leave a comment with your city, and let me know how far this story travels. Because what happens next? No one saw it coming. The first time Elara Whitcombe understood she was invisible, she was 19 years old, standing in the corner of Lady Pemberton's summer ball, while 3 young men discussed her as though she were a piece of unremarkable furniture. The Whitcombe girl? Plain as paste, that one. Bit too clever for her own good, I've heard. Reads philosophy. Christ, who'd want a wife who argues back? They'd laughed. She'd stood 3 feet away, holding a plate of untouched cake, and they hadn't even noticed. That was 7 years ago. 7 seasons of wearing her best gowns, mended carefully because there was never quite enough money for new ones, and watching younger girls, prettier girls, richer girls, sweep past her like she was made of smoke. 7 years of her mother's increasingly desperate attempts to marry her off to anyone with a pulse and a modest income. 7 years of polite smiles plastered over quiet humiliation. Now at 26, Elara had stopped pretending it hurt. She'd made peace with it, really. Spinsterhood wasn't the tragedy everyone claimed. She'd have her books, her correspondence with the few intellectuals who didn't know she was a woman, her small freedoms. It was better than marrying some pompous fool who'd expect her to produce heirs and keep her mouth shut. But tonight, everything had gone sideways. "Elara!" Her mother's voice was a hiss of barely concealed panic. "He's coming this way." "Who?" Elara didn't look up from her champagne. The ballroom of Greystone Manor was the same as every ballroom she'd endured for the past 7 years. Too hot, too loud, too full of people who looked through her. "The Duke. Thornwick. Oh God, he's..." Elara glanced up and froze. Lucian Ashford was, objectively speaking, the kind of man who shouldn't exist outside of Gothic novels. Tall, taller than anyone else in the room, with black hair swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved by someone who believed in angels but only painted demons. Sharp jaw, sharper eyes, pale gray and cold as winter fog. He moved through the crowd like a knife through silk, and people stepped aside without thinking about it. He was also staring directly at her. "Miss Whitcombe." His voice was low, controlled, and it cut through the ambient noise like a blade. Conversation around them stuttered and died. Elara blinked. Surely he was talking to someone behind her. But no. His gaze was fixed on her face, unwavering, almost clinical in its intensity. "Your Grace," she managed a curtsy. Her mother was making a strangled sound somewhere to her left. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. It wasn't even a request. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the calm certainty of a man who had never been refused in his life. Elara's first instinct was to say no. Her second instinct was to wonder if she'd misheard. Her third instinct was drowned out by her mother's elbow jabbing into her ribs. Of course, Your Grace." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. He extended his hand. She took it, and the ballroom exploded into whispers. The waltz was a special kind of torture. Not because Lucian Ashford was a poor dancer. On the contrary, he moved with the easy precision of someone who had been trained since childhood. But because he didn't speak, didn't smile, didn't do anything except watch her with those unnerving gray eyes, as though he were conducting some kind of private examination and she was the specimen under glass. "You're wondering why I asked you to dance," he said finally, his voice barely audible over the orchestra. "I wasn't, actually." Elara kept her gaze fixed somewhere past his shoulder. "I assumed you'd lost a wager." His mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. No wager. Then perhaps you've mistaken me for someone else. I haven't. The certainty in his voice sent a strange shiver down her spine. She risked a glance at his face. He was still watching her, and there was something in his expression she couldn't quite name. Not pity, not amusement. Something darker, more deliberate. You're Elara Whitcombe, he continued, eldest daughter of Baron Whitcombe of Harrowfield, 26 years old, 7 seasons in London, no offers of marriage. You read Hume and Locke when you think no one's paying attention. You walk in Hyde Park every Tuesday at dawn, and you once told Lady Ashcroft that her charity gala was performative nonsense, though not in those words. Elara's feet tangled. She stumbled, and his hand tightened on her waist, steadying her. How? Her voice came out strangled. How do you know that? I pay attention. To me? She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Forgive me, Your Grace, but I find that difficult to believe. Why? Because no one pays attention to me. That's rather the point. The music swelled. They turned, and for a moment the ballroom blurred into a kaleidoscope of candlelight and silk. When it settled again, Lucien's expression had shifted. Not softened, he didn't seem capable of softness, but something in his gaze had changed. You're wrong, he said quietly. People pay attention. They just don't see what I see. And what's that? He didn't answer. The waltz ended. He released her, stepped back, and bowed with meticulous formality. Thank you for the dance, Miss Whitcombe. Then he was gone, cutting back through the crowd as efficiently as he'd arrived, leaving Elara standing alone in the center of the dance floor with 200 people staring at her and absolutely no idea what had just happened. Her mother ambushed her before she made it to the refreshment table. What did he say? Lady Whitcombe's face was flushed, her eyes wild with something between hope and hysteria. What did he want? I don't know. Elara scanned the room, looking for an escape route. He asked me to dance. We danced. That's all. That's all? Elara, do you understand what just happened? The Duke of Thornwick doesn't dance. He doesn't attend balls unless he's obligated by the Queen herself, and he certainly doesn't— Mother, Elara caught her arm. Please, it was nothing, a momentary lapse in judgment on his part. By tomorrow, he'll have forgotten I exist. But even as she said it, she felt the weight of his gaze. She turned. He was standing across the ballroom, half hidden in shadow near the terrace doors, and he was watching her. Not with the idle curiosity of a man observing a social novelty, with the focused intensity of a predator tracking prey. Their eyes met. He didn't look away. Elara felt her pulse kick into something erratic and uncomfortable. She turned back to her mother, forcing a smile. I need air. She didn't wait for permission. She pushed through the crowd, ignored the whispers that followed her like gnats, and slipped out onto the terrace. The night air was cool and sharp, carrying the faint scent of roses from the garden below. Elara braced her hands on the stone balustrade and closed her eyes, willing her heartbeat to slow. Running away? She spun. Lucien Ashford stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the golden light of the ballroom. He'd followed her. Of course he had. I needed air, she said carefully. The ballroom is stifling. Yes, it is. He stepped onto the terrace, and the door clicked shut behind him. Suddenly, the space felt much smaller. You're upset. I'm confused. About? You. She straightened, meeting his gaze head on. If he was going to toy with her, she'd at least make him work for it. Why did you ask me to dance? I told you I pay attention. That's not an answer. It's the only one I'm willing to give tonight. Frustration flared hot in her chest. Then why follow me out here? He moved closer. Not threatening, he was too controlled for that, but deliberate, purposeful. Because I wanted to see if you'd run. And? You didn't. Should I have? His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Most people do. I'm not most people. No. His gaze traveled over her face, slow and assessing. You're not. The silence stretched between them, taut and strange. Elara's mind was racing, trying to fit the pieces together. A duke didn't notice spinsters. A duke didn't memorize their routines, their reading habits, their offhand comments at charity events. A duke didn't care. Unless You've been watching me, she said slowly. For how long? He didn't deny it. Long enough? Why? That, he said, is a longer conversation, one I don't intend to have on Lady Pemberton's terrace. Then where? Hyde Park. Tuesday morning, dawn. Her breath caught. You know I walk there. I told you, I pay attention. This is... She shook her head, trying to find the right word. Madness. Impossible. Dangerous. This is absurd. Perhaps. He stepped back, giving her space, but his eyes never left hers. But you'll come anyway. It wasn't a question. And the worst part, the truly infuriating part, was that he was right. Elara didn't sleep that night. She lay in her narrow bed in the Whitcombe townhouse, staring at the ceiling, replaying the evening over and over. The dance, the terrace, the way he'd looked at her, like she was a puzzle he'd been working on for years and had finally decided to solve. It didn't make sense. Men like Lucien Ashford didn't notice women like her. They married heiresses or foreign princesses, or elegant widows with impeccable bloodlines. They didn't waste time on aging spinsters with modest dowries and unfashionable opinions. And yet, I pay attention. What did that even mean? She rolled onto her side, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Outside, London was waking, the clatter of carts on cobblestones, the distant shout of a vendor. In a few hours, the sun would rise, and she'd have to decide whether to meet him. She should say no, should tell her mother, let her father handle it, retreat back into the safe obscurity she'd cultivated for 7 years. But you'll come anyway. Damn him. He was right. Hyde Park at dawn was a different world. The paths were empty, save for a few early riders and the occasional servant walking a dog. Mist clung to the grass, soft and gray, and the air smelled of dew and earth. Elara wrapped her cloak tighter and followed her usual route along the Serpentine, half expecting to find no one waiting. He was there. Lucian stood beneath an oak tree, hands clasped behind his back, dressed in dark riding clothes that made him look like he'd stepped out of a romantic painting. When he saw her, he didn't smile, didn't react at all, really, but something in his posture shifted. Acknowledgement, satisfaction. Miss Whitcombe. Your Grace. She stopped a few feet away, keeping the distance deliberate. You knew I'd come. Yes. Arrogant of you. Accurate, he corrected. There's a difference. She wanted to be annoyed. She should be annoyed. But there was something almost refreshing about his bluntness. No games, no false charm. Just cold, clinical honesty. You said this would be a longer conversation, she said. So talk. He gestured toward the path. Walk with me. They fell into step together, moving slowly along the water's edge. For a while, neither of them spoke. Elara was acutely aware of how strange this was, walking alone with a man she barely knew, a duke no less, in the gray half-light of morning. If anyone saw them, her reputation would be in tatters. Not that she had much of a reputation to begin with. You want to know why I've been watching you, Lucian said finally. I want to know how. And why you're telling me now. Fair. He stopped, turning to face her. 3 years ago, I attended a lecture at the Royal Society. Unofficially, there was a paper being presented on moral philosophy. Anonymous, of course, because the author was a woman. Elara's stomach dropped. The arguments were sharp, provocative, well-reasoned. I was impressed. His gaze was steady, unreadable. So I made inquiries, found out the author's identity, and I started paying attention. She couldn't breathe. You knew, all this time. Yes, and you didn't tell anyone. Why would I? He tilted his head slightly. You were careful, used a pseudonym, sent your work through intermediaries. You wanted anonymity. I respected that. But you still watched me. Yes. Why? Because, he said, and his voice dropped, became something quieter and more dangerous. I wanted to understand the woman behind the words. And the more I learned, the more certain I became. Certain of what? That you were wasted here. The words hung in the cold air between them. Elara stared at him, trying to parse the meaning, but his expression gave nothing away. I'm a spinster, she said flatly. Society's already decided what I'm worth. Society, Lucian said, is run by fools. A shocked laugh escaped her. You can't mean that. I rarely say things I don't mean. He stepped closer, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. You're intelligent, Miss Whitcombe. More intelligent than most of the men who dismiss you. You think clearly. You argue well. You see through pretense. And that matters to you because I need someone like you. The statement was so unexpected, so utterly bizarre, that Elara just blinked at him. Need me for what? I'll explain, but not here. He glanced toward the path, where a pair of riders had appeared in the distance. Meet me tomorrow. Same time, and I'll tell you everything. You're asking me to trust you. I'm asking you to be curious. I don't even know you. You know I've kept your secret for 3 years. His gaze was unflinching. That should count for something. It did. Damn it, it did. Tomorrow, she said. But if you're wasting my time, I'm not. He said it with such absolute certainty that she almost believed him. The second morning, he brought a letter. Read this, he said, handing her a folded piece of parchment sealed with wax. Then decide if you want to hear the rest. Elara broke the seal and unfolded the paper. The handwriting was precise, almost mechanical. To Miss E. Whitcombe, you do not know me, but I know you. 3 years ago, your essay on the ethics of social reform saved my life. I was a governess, dismissed without reference, destitute and desperate. Your words gave me the courage to fight for better terms. I now run a school for girls in York. We teach them to think, to question, to refuse the world's limitations. Thank you. M. Hartley. Elara looked up. Who is this? One of 37, Lucian said. I've been collecting them. Letters from women who read your work, who were inspired by it, who changed their lives because of it. Her hands were shaking. 37? And counting. How did you? I told you. I pay attention. He took a breath. Miss Whitcombe, Elara, you've been shouting into the void for years, and people have been listening. But your ideas deserve more than anonymity and academic journals. They deserve structure, resources, power. What are you saying? I'm saying, Lucien said, and his voice was steady as stone, that I want to help you build something that lasts. Elara stared at the letter in her hands, then at the man standing before her. The morning mist had started to burn off, and pale sunlight filtered through the trees, casting strange shadows across Lucian's face. Build something, she repeated slowly. You're not making sense. I'm making perfect sense. You're just not used to anyone taking you seriously. He clasped his hands behind his back, that familiar controlled posture. Tell me, Miss Whitcombe, what do you want? She faltered. No one had ever asked her that. Not once in 26 years. That's irrelevant. Answer the question. Why? Because I'm offering you a choice. And before you can make it, you need to know what you actually want. The directness of it threw her off balance. She'd spent so long suppressing her desires, folding them up small and tucking them away, that the question felt almost obscene. I want to matter, she said finally, and hated how raw her voice sounded. I want my ideas to reach people who need them. She stopped, swallowed hard. I want to stop being invisible. Then stop being invisible. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. Lucian stepped closer. You've been playing by their rules, Miss Whitcombe, hoping someone would notice you if you were just quiet enough, clever enough, patient enough. How's that working? The words stung because they were true. What's your alternative? Storm into whites and demand they listen to me? Stage a philosophical coup? No. You marry me. The world tilted sideways. Elara heard the words, understood them individually, but together they formed something so absurd, so completely insane, that her brain simply refused to process it. I'm sorry, she said carefully. I think I misheard you. You didn't. His expression hadn't changed. He might as well have been discussing the weather. Marry me. Become Duchess of Thornwick. Use that position to do everything you've been trying to do from the shadows. You've lost your mind. I assure you I haven't. You don't even know me. I know enough. He pulled another letter from his coat. Margaret Hartley's school in York? I funded it, anonymously, through intermediaries. I've been funding 17 similar projects across England for the past 2 years. Schools for girls, training programs for governesses, legal aid for women dismissed without cause. He handed her the letter. But money only goes so far. These institutions need legitimacy, protection, a name that carries weight. Elara unfolded the second letter with numb fingers. It was a financial ledger, dozens of entries, thousands of pounds, all funneled into projects that looked suspiciously like her own half-formed ideas made real. She couldn't finish. Why? Because 7 years ago my sister married a baron who promised to cherish her. Lucien's voice didn't change, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. He beat her, isolated her. When she tried to leave, she had no money, no skills, nowhere to go. Society told her to endure it, to be grateful, to remember her duty. The silence that followed was terrible. What happened to her? Elara asked quietly. She's dead. Fever, they said, but I saw the bruises. His jaw tightened. I was 22, powerless, and by the time I inherited the duchy, it was too late to save her. So I decided to save everyone else. Elara's throat closed. She wanted to say something, anything, but words felt inadequate, stupid. I need a partner, Lucien continued. Someone who understands what we're building. Someone who won't waste time on tea parties and charity galas while real work needs doing. Someone who thinks the way you think. You need a business partner, not a wife. I need both. Marriage gives you access, power, the ability to move through society without question. As my duchess, you'd have resources, influence, freedom most women never dream of. He met her eyes. And I need someone I can trust. Someone who's been watching society from the outside long enough to see it clearly. This is insane. Yes, people will talk. Let them. They'll say... She stopped because she knew exactly what they'd say. That she'd trapped him, seduced him, that a desperate spinster had somehow ensnared the most eligible man in England through manipulation or blackmail or sheer pathetic persistence. They'll say I'm a fool, Lucien said. I don't care. Do you? And that was the question, wasn't it? Did she care? She'd spent 7 years caring desperately what people thought, trying to make herself smaller, quieter, more acceptable. And where had it gotten her? I need time, she said. To think. Take it, but decide quickly. The season ends in 6 weeks. After that, I'm returning to my estate in Northumberland. If you're coming with me, I need to know. And if I say no, then I'll find someone else. It won't work as well. He paused, something almost like regret crossing his face. But I'll manage. Why me, though? Really? There are dozens of intelligent women in London, widows with experience, heiresses with resources. Because you've been writing revolutionary philosophy for 3 years under a fake name and no one's caught you. That takes intelligence, discipline, and a talent for working outside the system. He tilted his head. Also, you're the only person I've met who argued with Lady Ashcroft and won. Despite everything, Elara laughed. I didn't win. She banned me from her events. Exactly. You chose principle over access. Most people can't do that. The compliment, delivered in his flat, clinical tone, hit harder than it should have. Elara folded the letters carefully, buying herself time to think. This isn't a love match, she said. No. You're not offering me romance, just partnership. Correct? And you expect me to believe you'd be content with that? That you'd never... She stopped, heat rising in her face. That there wouldn't be expectations. There would be one expectation. An heir eventually. I won't apologize for that. The duchy needs continuity. His gaze was steady. But I'm not interested in some trembling virgin who lies there like a martyr. If we do this, it'll be as equals. Your choice. Your terms. The bluntness should have been shocking. Instead, it was almost respectful, as though he trusted her to handle the truth without fainting. I need to go, Elara said abruptly. My mother will notice I'm gone. Tomorrow, same time. I don't know if I'll come. You will. He said it with that infuriating certainty. Because you're curious, and because you know this is the only real choice anyone's offered you in years. He was right, and she hated him for it. The Whitcombe townhouse was in chaos when Elara returned. Her mother was pacing the drawing room, still in her dressing gown, while her father sat in his chair reading the morning paper as though nothing unusual was happening. Which, for him, was probably true. "Where have you been?" Lady Whitcomb's voice pitched high with anxiety. "You can't just vanish before breakfast, Elara. People will think, 'I went for a walk.' I always go for walks. Not the morning after the Duke of Thornwick danced with you." Her mother grabbed her shoulders. "Do you understand what's happening? The invitations started arriving an hour ago. Everyone wants you at their events. They're calling you the season's mystery. That's ridiculous. That's opportunity." Her mother's eyes were wild with hope. "If you play this correctly, you might still make a decent match. Lord Ashford needs a wife, and Mrs. Weatherby's nephew just returned from India. Mother." Elara extracted herself gently. "I'm going to change. Then I'm going to have breakfast. And then I'm going to spend the afternoon in the library. But the invitations can wait." She escaped upstairs before her mother could protest further. In her room, she locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed, pulling the letters from her pocket. 37 women. 37 lives changed by her words. She'd written those essays late at night, hunched over her desk by candlelight, convinced no one would ever read them. She'd sent them through her father's secretary, who thought he was posting business correspondence. She'd used a male pseudonym because female philosophers were dismissed as hysterical or delusional. And the entire time, Lucian Ashford had been reading her work, funding projects based on her ideas, building something real from her theories. The sheer impossibility of it made her head spin. But what made her hands shake was the offer itself. Marriage. To a duke. Not for love, he'd been brutally clear about that, but for purpose. For the chance to actually do something instead of just writing about it from the safety of anonymity. She should refuse, obviously. It was too strange, too sudden, too much. Marriages weren't built on shared intellectual interests and mutual goals. They were built on affection, compatibility, social advantage. Except hers wouldn't be. None of the marriages available to her would be. She'd either die a spinster or marry some aging widower who needed a housekeeper and didn't mind her unfashionable appearance. This was different. This was... A knock rattled the door. "Elara?" Her mother's voice slightly calmer now. "There's a letter for you. It just arrived." Elara opened the door. Her mother handed her a cream envelope, sealed with the Thornwick crest. "What does it say?" Lady Whitcombe was practically vibrating with curiosity. "I don't know. I haven't opened it." "Well, open it!" Elara broke the seal. Inside was a single card, written in that same precise handwriting. "Tonight, Lady Pemberton's musicale. I'll be requesting your company again. If you want me to stop, send word before 6. Otherwise, I'll assume you're still considering L.A." "What does it say?" her mother demanded. "He's going to be at Lady Pemberton's tonight." Elara folded the card. "And he wants to see me again." Her mother made a sound like a strangled cat. "I knew it. I knew he was interested. Oh, Elara, this is your chance. You must wear the green silk. No, the blue. And we'll need to do something with your hair. Mother. Because you can't possibly go looking like you've just crawled out of the library, even if that's where you spend all your time. Mother." Lady Whitcombe stopped mid-sentence. "I'll wear the gray," Elara said, "and I'll do my own hair. And if you try to turn this into some grand campaign, I'll refuse to go at all. But that's my condition." Her mother opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, finally nodded, looking more confused than angry. "The gray, fine, but at least let me call the maid to fix your hair properly." It was a compromise. Elara accepted it. Lady Pemberton's musicale was exactly as tedious as expected. The drawing room was packed with people pretending to appreciate a soprano whose voice could shatter glass, while servants circulated with champagne, and everyone whispered about the only thing that mattered, the Duke of Thornwick's sudden interest in the Whitcombe spinster. Elara felt their eyes on her from the moment she arrived. Not the usual indifference. This was active scrutiny. Women she'd stood next to for 7 years without acknowledgement now watched her like she was a specimen in a museum. Dangerous, incomprehensible. "Miss Whitcombe?" Lord Ashford materialized at her elbow, all oily charm and tobacco breath. "What a delightful surprise to see you here." You've seen me at every event for 7 years, Elara thought, but didn't say. Lord Ashford, I hear congratulations are in order. The Duke seems quite taken with you. Does he? Oh, come now. Everyone's talking about it. Dancing with you not once, but twice. Most irregular. Perhaps he enjoys irregular things. Indeed. Ashford's smile didn't reach his eyes. One wonders what he sees in... He stopped, as though catching himself mid-insult. That is, you must be very pleased. Must I? The soprano hit a note that made the chandelier tremble. Ashford winced and excused himself. Elara turned back to the window, watching her own reflection in the darkened glass. The gray dress was simple, unfashionable, exactly wrong for an event like this. But it was honest, and if Lucian Ashford wanted her, he'd have to take her as she was. You're making people nervous. She turned. Lucien stood behind her, dressed in impeccable black, holding 2 glasses of champagne. He handed her one. I'm doing nothing, she said. Exactly. They expected you to preen, to gloat. Instead, you're standing here looking like you'd rather be anywhere else. I would rather be anywhere else. Good. So would I. He glanced around the room. Have you made a decision? Not yet. What's stopping you? Common sense. His mouth twitched. Overrated. You're asking me to upend my entire life based on 3 conversations and a stack of letters. I'm offering you purpose. Most people never get that. Most people aren't asked to marry strangers for it. Fair. He took a sip of champagne, watching her over the rim of the glass. What would convince you? Proof. Of. That this isn't some elaborate game. That you're serious. That I wouldn't just be another project you'd abandon when something more interesting came along. Lucian set down his glass. Tomorrow. Come to my London house. I'll show you everything. The schools, the financial records, the correspondence. All of it. You can examine every detail, ask any question, and then you'll decide. Your house? Alone? Unchaperoned, yes. Scandalous, I know. His eyes held hers. But if we're going to be partners, you need to see what you're getting into, and I need to know you can handle the truth. The soprano finished her song. Polite applause rippled through the room. Elara felt the weight of 100 stares, all wondering what they were discussing, what secrets were being exchanged. 3 o'clock, Lucian said. Thornwick House, Mayfair. Don't send word. Just come. And if I don't? Then I'll know your answer. He bowed, placed his empty glass on a passing servant's tray, and disappeared into the crowd before she could respond. Elara didn't tell her mother where she was going. She simply informed her that she had an errand, called for a hack, and gave the driver the address in Mayfair. The less her mother knew, the less she could interfere, or panic, or try to orchestrate something that would make everything worse. Thornwick House was massive, a stone mansion that took up half a block, with iron gates and windows that reflected the afternoon sun like blank eyes. The kind of house that made you feel small just looking at it. A butler answered her knock. He didn't seem surprised to see her, which meant Lucien had been expecting her. Of course he had. Miss Whitcombe, His Grace is in the study. This way, please. She followed him through a marble entrance hall, down a corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, and into a room that smelled of leather and old paper. Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling, and a massive desk dominated the space, covered in neat stacks of documents. Lucien stood at the window, still as stone. When the butler announced her and left, closing the door behind him, he turned. You came. You knew I would. I hoped. He gestured to the desk. Everything I promised. Start wherever you want. Elara approached the desk slowly, scanning the documents. Financial ledgers. Letters from headmistresses and governesses. Plans for new schools. Legal documents securing property for women's housing. It was overwhelming. Years of work. Thousands of pounds. All organized with meticulous precision. She picked up a letter from a woman in Manchester, thanking an anonymous benefactor for funding that had saved her small school from closure. How long have you been doing this? 6 years, since I inherited. He moved to stand beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. My sister died when I was 22. It took 4 years to gain control of the duchy, and the moment I did, I started. Why didn't you just do this openly? You're a duke. You could what? Announce that I think society's treatment of women is barbaric? That I believe they deserve education, autonomy, legal protection? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'd be dismissed as a radical, a madman. Every proposal would be blocked. Every school shut down. Power only works if you know how to use it quietly. Elara leafed through more documents. There were dozens of schools, training programs, even a legal fund for women seeking divorces. It was everything she'd argued for in her essays, made real. But you can't do this alone forever, she said. Eventually, people will notice, ask questions. Yes, which is why I need you. Me, specifically. You specifically. He pulled a folder from the bottom of the stack. These are the next 5 years. Expansion plans. Political connections we need to cultivate. Legal reforms we need to push through Parliament. I can fund it, but I can't be the face of it. Society expects me to be ruthless, calculating, cold. If I suddenly champion women's causes, they'll think I've gone soft. But I'm nobody. They'll ignore me. Now, yes, but as my Duchess, he opened the folder, revealing detailed plans, timelines, strategies. You'd have credibility, access, the ability to speak in rooms I can't enter. And more importantly, you understand these women. You've been one of them. You know what they need because you've needed it yourself. Elara stared at the plans. They were good, better than good. They were exactly what she would have designed if she'd had the resources, the power, the freedom. You've been planning this for a long time, she said quietly. 3 years since I read your first essay. But you could have approached me then. Why wait? Because I needed to be sure that you were serious, that you wouldn't break under pressure, that you could keep a secret. He met her eyes. And I needed to build something worth showing you first. The honesty of it was staggering. No flattery, no pretty lies, just cold calculation and strategic patience. This isn't a proposal, Elara said. This is a business negotiation. Yes. And you expect me to be flattered by that? I expect you to be realistic. Lucian's voice didn't change, but something in his gaze intensified. I'm not offering you romance, Miss Whitcombe. I'm offering you everything you've wanted since you were old enough to realize society was broken. Purpose, power, the ability to actually change things instead of just writing about them. If you want pretty words and love sonnets, I'm the wrong man. But if you want to matter, if you want your ideas to reshape England, then I'm the only chance you have. The words should have been insulting, arrogant. Instead, they were just true. Elara picked up a letter from a girl in Liverpool who'd been taught to read because of a school Lucien had funded. The handwriting was shaky, unpracticed, but the words were clear. Thank you for giving me a future. 37 letters, 17 schools, hundreds of women whose lives had been changed, and he'd built it all based on her ideas. If I agree, she said slowly, what happens next? We announce our courtship, publicly, at the Ashcroft Ball next week. He moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the quiet room. Society will be vicious. They'll call you a schemer. They'll say I've lost my mind. You'll be scrutinized, mocked, dissected. Are you prepared for that? Are you? I've been called worse. But I haven't. Elara set down the letter. I've spent 7 years being invisible. I don't know how to be anything else. Then learn. His voice was sharp, challenging. You're not invisible anymore, Miss Whitcombe. The moment I danced with you, you became the most talked about woman in London. There's no going back. The only question is whether you're going to hide from it or use it. He was right. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I need one more thing, Elara said. Name it. Autonomy. I won't be your puppet. If I do this, I make my own decisions, choose my own projects, speak my own mind, even if it contradicts you. Especially if it contradicts me. Lucian extended his hand. Partners? Elara looked at his hand, at the documents covering the desk, at the 6 years of work he'd poured into building something that mattered. She thought about 37 letters, about Margaret Hartley running a school in York, about girls in Liverpool learning to read. She thought about 7 years of being invisible, of watching younger women marry while she faded into obscurity, of dying slowly in some country house, her ideas locked in journals no one would ever read, and she thought about what it would feel like to actually matter. She took his hand. Partners. His grip was firm, businesslike, and when he smiled, really smiled, for the first time since she'd met him, it transformed his entire face. Good, he said, because the Ashcroft ball is in 5 days, and we have a lot of work to do. Work? Society needs to believe we're in love, or at least obsessed with each other, which means we need to be seen together, often, starting tonight. Tonight? The Harrington dinner party. I've already secured you an invitation. He released her hand. Wear something memorable, and practice looking like you don't hate everyone in the room. I do hate everyone in the room. I know, that's why you need to practice. Despite herself, Elara laughed. It felt strange laughing in this massive house with a man she barely knew, about to throw herself into a scheme that would either change her life or destroy it completely. But she'd made her choice. And for the first time in 7 years, she felt awake. The Harrington dinner was a masterclass in social manipulation. Lucien arrived precisely 15 minutes after Elara, made polite conversation with their hosts, and then, with the casualness of someone discussing the weather, positioned himself next to her for the entire evening. Not obviously, nothing so crass as hovering, but every time Elara turned around, he was there, handing her a glass of wine, laughing at something she said, leaning close to whisper a comment about Lord Harrington's terrible wig. You're being too obvious, she murmured during a lull in conversation. That's the point. People will think, let them. His hand brushed hers as he reached for the butter dish. By tomorrow, half of London will be speculating about us. By next week, it'll be accepted truth. That's how these things work. He was right. She could already see it happening, the way Lady Harrington kept glancing at them, the whispers between two women across the table, the calculating look in Lord Pemberton's eyes. You enjoy this, Elara said. The manipulation. I enjoy efficiency. This is the fastest way to establish our narrative. And what is our narrative? That I saw something in you no one else did, that I pursued you despite society's doubts, that you resisted at first, but eventually, he paused, his gray eyes meeting hers. Eventually you realized I was worth the risk. The words hung between them, heavier than they should be. It wasn't real. Elara knew that. This was performance, strategy, a carefully constructed fiction. But looking at him in the candlelight, watching the way he spoke about their imaginary romance like it was a military campaign, she felt something shift. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. She'd spent her whole life pretending to be smaller than she was, quieter, more acceptable. He'd spent his doing the opposite, turning himself into something cold and untouchable so no one would see what he was really doing. They were both actors, just on different stages. The Ashcroft ball, she said. What happens there? You dance with me, 3 times, more than propriety allows. That'll cause a scandal. A small one, manageable. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of aristocratic ease. And then, 2 weeks later, I'll propose. Publicly. At the Royal Opera. The opera? Elara nearly choked on her wine. That's dramatic? Yes. Memorable? Absolutely. Effective? We'll find out. And if I say no, you won't. He said it without arrogance, just calm certainty. Because by then you'll have spent 3 weeks being treated like someone who matters. And you won't want to go back. The accuracy of the statement stole her breath. He was right. He was absolutely right, and they both knew it. Across the table, Lady Harrington cleared her throat loudly. Your Grace, Miss Whitcombe, you must tell us, how did you two first meet? The room went silent, every eye fixed on them, hungry for details. Lucien didn't hesitate. A lecture. 3 years ago. She asked a question that made the speaker sputter for 10 minutes. It was close enough to the truth to be plausible. Elara forced herself to smile. I didn't mean to humiliate him. Of course you did. Lucien's expression was perfectly serious, but his eyes held a spark of amusement. It was magnificent. And you remembered that? Lady Harrington pressed. For 3 years? I remember everything about her. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through the gathered guests. Elara felt her face heat. This was too much, too fast, too... Lucien's foot pressed against hers under the table. A warning, or reassurance. She couldn't tell which. How romantic, Lady Harrington sighed. And here we all thought you were destined for spinsterhood, Miss Whitcombe. No offense. None taken, Elara said through her teeth. Though I must say it is rather sudden. One day you're a wallflower, the next you're... She gestured vaguely at Lucian. Well, quite the transformation. I haven't transformed at all, Elara said. I'm exactly who I've always been. Some people just took longer to notice. The barb hit its mark. Lady Harrington's smile turned brittle. Of course. How silly of me. The dinner dragged on for another hour, but the damage, or the foundation, depending on perspective, was done. By the time dessert was served, everyone at the table had accepted it as fact. The Duke of Thornwick was pursuing Elara Whitcombe, and she, inexplicably, was allowing it. No, that was exhausting, Elara said, as Lucian helped her into his carriage afterward. You did well. I wanted to throw my soup at Lady Harrington. I know. That's why I kicked you under the table. He settled into the seat across from her. Tomorrow will be worse. The gossip will have spread. You'll be invited to everything, and everyone will be watching to see if you falter. Comforting. I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to prepare you. His gaze was steady. This is what you agreed to, Miss Whitcombe. If you want power, you have to be willing to fight for it. And fighting means enduring their scrutiny, their mockery, their jealousy, until they finally accept that you're not going anywhere. And what if I can't? You can. You've been doing it for 7 years. You just weren't doing it for yourself. The carriage jolted over a rough patch of road. The Ashcroft Ball, 5 days. Practice being seen. And then we make it official. Elara nodded, even though her stomach was twisting. 5 days. 5 days to transform from invisible spinster to the Duke of Thornwick's chosen partner. 5 days to convince London society that this impossible, strategic, utterly calculated arrangement was somehow real. The carriage stopped outside the Whitcombe townhouse. Lucian opened the door himself, offering his hand to help her down. One more thing, he said as she stepped onto the pavement. Stop second-guessing yourself. You're brilliant, Miss Whitcombe. Act like it. He released her hand and tapped the carriage roof. The driver cracked the reins and the vehicle rolled away into the darkness, leaving Elara standing alone on the street. Brilliant. No one had ever called her that before. She turned and walked into the house, her mind already racing ahead to the Ashcroft Ball, to the inevitable proposal, to the life she was about to step into. And for the first time in her entire existence, she wasn't afraid of being seen. She wasn't afraid of being seen. The realization should have felt empowering. Instead, it kept her awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling while her mind churned through every possible disaster waiting in the next 5 days. By morning, the invitations had multiplied like weeds. Her mother burst into her room at 8 o'clock, waving a fistful of cream-colored cards. The Ashcroft Ball! You're invited! And Lady Pemberton's luncheon, and the Duchess of Somerset's garden party, and... Elara, are you listening? No. This is your moment. Everything we've worked toward, we haven't worked toward anything. I've spent 7 years being ignored. Elara threw back the covers and crossed to the wash basin. And now I'm a curiosity, that's all. That's everything! Her mother's voice pitched higher. Do you understand how rare this is? The Duke of Thornwick doesn't court anyone. He's refused every eligible woman in England, and he chose you. He chose an arrangement. There's a difference. Her mother's face crumpled. Why must you always diminish yourself? Can't you simply be grateful? The question stung because it was genuine. Her mother truly believed this was a miracle, a last-minute rescue from the shame of permanent spinsterhood. She couldn't see what Elara saw, that this wasn't salvation. It was strategy. And strategy only worked if you kept your eyes open. I'm grateful, Elara said carefully. But I'm also realistic. 5 days, Mother. 5 days until the Ashcroft Ball, and everyone in London will be watching to see if I fail. Then don't fail. Simple. Brutal. Exactly what Lucian would have said. Elara dressed in silence while her mother fussed with the invitations, sorting them by importance, by date, by social weight. The gray dress again, she was running out of acceptable options, and there was no money for new gowns. She'd have to make do. The luncheon is this afternoon, her mother said. Lady Pemberton specifically requested your attendance. You can't refuse. I wasn't planning to. And you'll need to. Her mother hesitated. Elara, you'll need to be charming, pleasant. These women will be looking for reasons to dismiss you. Don't give them any. You want me to lie. I want you to survive. The honesty of it was startling. Her mother wasn't asking her to be perfect, just strategic, just careful enough to last until the arrangement solidified into something society couldn't tear apart. I'll manage, Elara said. Her mother nodded, relief washing over her face. Good. Because your father's business isn't doing well. And if this falls through… She stopped as though catching herself. Never mind, just be careful. She left, closing the door softly behind her. Elara sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of unspoken truth settling over her shoulders. Her father's business. Of course. The real reason her mother had pushed so hard for 7 years, the desperation beneath every failed introduction, every awkward tea party. They needed her to marry well. Not for love, for survival. And now, improbably, she had the chance. If she didn't destroy it first. Lady Pemberton's luncheon was a gauntlet disguised as polite society. 12 women gathered in a drawing room drenched in afternoon sunlight, picking at cucumber sandwiches and dissecting Elara with surgical precision. Miss Whitcombe, you must tell us, how did you capture the Duke's attention? Lady Ashcroft's smile was all teeth. We're simply dying to know. Elara set down her teacup slowly, buying time. Across the room, she caught sight of herself in a mirror. Gray dress, unremarkable hair, the same face she'd worn for 26 years. Nothing had changed except context. I didn't capture anything, she said. We had a conversation. He found it interesting. A conversation? Lady Ashcroft's eyebrows lifted. How novel. The other women tittered. Elara felt heat creeping up her neck but forced herself to stay calm. This was a test. They wanted her to crumble, to reveal herself as an imposter playing above her station. The Duke values intelligence, Elara continued. Perhaps that's unfamiliar territory for some. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Lady Ashcroft's smile vanished. Are you implying… I'm stating a fact. The Duke and I share intellectual interests. It's not complicated. No, dear, it's not. Mrs. Weatherby leaned forward, her expression falsely sympathetic. It's just peculiar. A man of his stature could have anyone. Why would he choose… She gestured vaguely at Elara. Well, you understand? I understand perfectly. You're asking why someone like him would want someone like me. Exactly. Mrs. Weatherby looked relieved. It does seem rather… because I don't bore him. Elara met each woman's gaze in turn, holding it until they looked away. I don't simper. I don't pretend to be less intelligent than I am. I don't waste his time with gossip and social climbing, and apparently that's worth more than a pretty face and a large dowry. Silence. Lady Pemberton cleared her throat. Well, how refreshingly honest. The Duke appreciates honesty. Does he appreciate impertinence? Lady Ashcroft's voice was sharp. Because that's what you're displaying, Miss Whitcombe. We're trying to help you navigate society, and you're treating us like adversaries. Aren't you? The question hung in the perfumed air. No one answered, but the truth was written on every face. They weren't her friends, they were gatekeepers, and she was an interloper trying to force her way through doors they'd kept locked for generations. I appreciate the concern, Elara said, softer now, but I don't need navigation. I've been watching society for 7 years. I know exactly how it works. Watching from the sidelines is different from playing the game, Mrs. Weatherby warned. I'm not playing a game, I'm making a choice. A dangerous one. The Duke is difficult, demanding. There are rumors. I don't care about rumors. You should. Lady Ashcroft leaned forward. People are saying he's using you, that this is some kind of experiment, that once the novelty wears off, he'll discard you like what? Like every man in this room has discarded governesses and servants and women without power? Elara's voice was steady, but fury burned beneath it. At least he's honest about his intentions. Can any of your husbands say the same? Lady Pemberton gasped. 2 women stood up, preparing to leave. The luncheon was disintegrating, and Elara knew she should apologize, should smooth things over, should play the role expected of her. Instead, she stood. Thank you for the hospitality, Lady Pemberton. but I think I've had enough cucumber sandwiches for one lifetime." She walked out before anyone could respond, her hands shaking but her spine straight. Outside, the street was blessedly empty. Elara walked 3 blocks before her legs gave out, and she sank onto a bench near the park, pressing her palms against her eyes. Stupid. That had been monumentally stupid. She'd just alienated half of London's influential women in under an hour. "You look like you were about to commit murder." She jerked her head up. Lucian stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. "What are you doing here?" "Following you. I was at my club across the street when I saw you leave." He sat down beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his presence. "What happened?" "I destroyed everything. I was rude, defensive, arrogant." "Good." She blinked. "What?" "You stood up for yourself, refused to be bullied. That's exactly what I need you to do." "But they'll talk." "Yes, they'll call you difficult, ungrateful, too proud for your own good." He tilted his head, studying her. "And in a week, when we're engaged, they'll say you were justified, that you had the strength to stand beside me instead of cowering behind me." "You can't know that." "I can, because I've been watching these people for years, and I know exactly how they work. They respect power, Miss Whitcombe. Not kindness, not compliance. Power." He stood, offering his hand. "Come with me." "Where?" "Somewhere you can remember why you agreed to this." She took his hand. But then, the school was hidden in Whitechapel, tucked between a butcher's shop and a boarding house. From the outside, it looked like nothing. A narrow brick building with barred windows and a faded sign that read St. Catherine's. But inside it was alive. 20 girls aged 8 to 16 sat in rows, bent over slates, writing with fierce concentration. A woman in her 30s stood at the front, pointing to a chalkboard covered in mathematical equations. "This is Margaret Hartley," Lucian said quietly. "The woman who wrote you that first letter." Elara stared. She'd imagined Margaret as older, more formal, not this young woman with ink-stained fingers and a determined set to her jaw. "Miss Hartley," Lucian's voice carried across the room. "A moment." Margaret looked up and her face transformed. "Your Grace! We weren't expecting—" She hurried over, wiping her hands on her skirt. "This is such an honor." "The honor is mine. I wanted to introduce you to someone." He gestured to Elara. "This is Miss Elara Whitcombe." Margaret went very still. Her eyes widened. "The Miss Whitcombe?" "I don't—" Elara started, but Margaret grabbed her hands. "You saved my life. Your essay on economic independence. I was about to accept a position with a man who'd been inappropriate with his last 3 governesses. But your words made me realize I had a choice. I could fight for better terms, and when that didn't work, I could build something new." Tears gathered in her eyes. "This school exists because of you." Elara couldn't breathe. She'd written those words late at night, alone in her room, convinced no one would care. And now this woman, this brave, brilliant woman, was telling her they'd changed everything. "I had help," Margaret continued. "His Grace provided funding, but you provided the courage." "Show her the library," Lucian said softly. Margaret led them through a narrow corridor to a small room lined with shelves. Books, hundreds of them, filled every available space. Philosophy, mathematics, science, literature, everything a curious mind could want. "We teach them to think," Margaret explained. "Not just read and write, and so we teach them logic, reason, how to argue a position. Half of them will become governesses, but some—" her voice caught. "Some will become teachers themselves, or writers, or reformers. They'll change things." Elara ran her fingers along the spines of the books. Some of them were hers, essays she'd written, published in journals, now sitting on these shelves where girls could read them. "How many schools are there?" she asked. 17 funded by His Grace, Margaret said, but dozens more inspired by them. Women hearing about what we're doing and starting their own programs. It's spreading, Miss Whitcombe. Your ideas are spreading. Lucian was watching her, waiting, testing maybe, to see if this was enough, if the reality matched the promise he'd made. "I want to help," Elara said, "not just with money. I want to teach, to write curriculum, to—" She turned to him. "Is that possible?" "It's why I brought you here. Margaret looked between them, understanding dawning. You're courting her. Technically, yes, and she's going to become your duchess. If she survives the next 5 days, Margaret laughed, sharp and surprised. Oh, she'll survive. Anyone who can write like that? She's tougher than all of London society combined. She squeezed Elara's hands once more. Fight for this. Please. We need you. They left 20 minutes later, after Elara had met every girl in the school and promised to return. Outside, the afternoon had turned gray, threatening rain. Thank you, Elara said as they walked, for showing me that. You needed to see it, to remember what's at stake. Lucian's jaw was tight. The Ashcroft Ball isn't just a social event, it's a declaration. Once we dance, once I make my intentions clear, there's no going back. You'll be scrutinized, attacked, tested in ways you can't imagine. And if you break, I won't break. You say that now, but when Lady Ashcroft spreads rumors that you trapped me, when Mrs. Weatherby suggests you're only after my money, when they whisper that you're too old, too plain, too nothing to possibly deserve this. He stopped, forcing her to meet his eyes. Will you still be standing? Yes. How can you be sure? Because I've been nothing for 26 years. I know exactly what it feels like to be dismissed, overlooked, erased. And I'm done with it. Her voice was steady. I'd rather be destroyed fighting than live another day invisible. Something flickered in his expression, not quite approval, but close. The ball is in 3 days. Between now and then, we need to be seen together constantly. Walks in the park, the theater, every public space where society gathers. Can you handle that? Can you? His mouth twitched. I asked first. Then yes, I can handle it. Good. Because tonight, we're attending the opera, and I'm going to kiss your hand in full view of every gossip in London. Her pulse jumped. That's strategic. It establishes intimacy without crossing lines. He started walking again. Wear something other than gray. Borrow from your mother if you have to. I need you visible. I don't have... She stopped, embarrassment flooding her. My wardrobe is limited. Lucien turned back. How limited? 3 dresses suitable for evening, all at least 3 seasons old. He was silent for a long moment. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. A modiste will arrive at your house. Tell her I sent you. She'll handle everything. I can't afford... I'm paying. Consider it an investment in our partnership. That's not... It feels like charity. It's not charity, it's practicality. You can't fight society in outdated gowns any more than I can fund schools without capital. His expression softened just slightly. Let me do this, Miss Whitcombe. You're about to become a duchess. Act like it. Before she could argue, he hailed a passing hack and helped her inside. Through the window, as the carriage pulled away, she watched him standing on the pavement, tall, controlled, utterly certain. And for the first time, she let herself believe this might actually work. The modiste arrived promptly at 9, carrying fabric samples and sketches and an assistant laden with measuring tape. His Grace said you need a complete wardrobe, Madame Laurent announced, sweeping into the drawing room like a small, fashionable storm. Day dresses, evening gowns, walking costumes, riding habits. We have much work to do. Elara's mother hovered in the doorway, eyes wide. The Duke is paying for this? He is investing in his future duchess, Madame Laurent corrected. Now, Miss Whitcombe, stand here. We must see what we're working with. The next 2 hours were a blur of measurements, fabric swatches, and rapid-fire French as Madame Laurent sketched designs with terrifying efficiency. Emerald silk for the opera, deep blue for day visits, a riding habit in burgundy. And for the Ashcroft ball, gold, Madame Laurent decided. Not yellow, true gold like candlelight. It will make you glow. I don't glow. You will. The modiste's smile was knowing. His Grace knows what he wants, and what he wants is for you to be impossible to ignore. 3 dresses would be ready by tomorrow, the rest within a week. Madame Laurent departed in the same whirlwind fashion she'd arrived, leaving Elara standing in the drawing room surrounded by sketches of a woman who looked nothing like her. This is really happening, her mother whispered. Isn't it? Yes. Are you frightened? Elara thought about Margaret Hartley's school, about 17 other schools spread across England, about 37 letters and hundreds of girls learning to think for themselves. No, she said. I'm ready. Mom. The opera was exactly as Lucian promised, a public spectacle designed to cement their narrative. He arrived at the Whitcombe townhouse in his personal carriage, helped Elara inside with exaggerated courtesy, and proceeded to escort her into the theater as though she were royalty. Every head turned. Every conversation paused. By the time they reached his box, prime location, center of the second tier, half of London was staring. "Ignore them," Lucian murmured as he pulled out her chair. "Easy for you to say." "No, it's never easy, but it's necessary." He sat beside her, closer than strictly proper. "When the first act ends, I'm going to take your hand. You're going to let me. And then you're going to smile like you don't notice everyone watching. I'm not an actress. You've been acting for 7 years, playing the obedient spinster. This is just a different role." The lights dimmed, the orchestra swelled. Elara tried to focus on the stage, but every nerve in her body was aware of Lucien beside her, of the weight of observation pressing down from every direction. The soprano began to sing, something tragic and Italian. Elara didn't speak Italian, couldn't follow the plot, didn't care. All she could think about was the inevitable moment at the end of the act when Lucien would touch her and society would draw its conclusions. His hand found hers in the darkness. Not a grab, not aggressive, just a quiet claiming, his fingers lacing through hers with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Except he hadn't. She knew that suddenly, instinctively. Lucien Ashford didn't do this, didn't hold hands in darkened theaters, didn't court women publicly. He was as much an actor as she was, playing a role designed to achieve a specific goal. The realization was strangely comforting. When the lights came up, he didn't release her immediately. Instead, he lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. Brief, formal, but unmistakably intimate. The theater erupted in whispers. "Well done," he murmured. "Now smile." She did. It felt false, stretched too wide, but Lucien nodded slightly in approval. "Intermission. We're going to walk the corridor. You're going to greet people politely. And when Lady Ashcroft inevitably corners you, you're going to be gracious." "Gracious?" "You can be rude to subordinates, but Lady Ashcroft has influence. We need her neutral, not actively hostile. She hates me. She hates that I chose you. There's a difference." He stood, offering his arm. "Come. Let's give them something to talk about." The corridor was a gauntlet. People they'd never spoken to suddenly wanted introductions. Women who'd ignored Elara for 7 years now air-kissed her cheeks and exclaimed over her gown. Men who'd never noticed her existence now studied her with open calculation. And through it all, Lucien stayed at her side. Not hovering, not protecting, just present. A silent reminder that she wasn't alone in this performance. Lady Ashcroft intercepted them near the champagne table. "Miss Whitcombe, Your Grace, what a charming display." Her smile was poisonous. "Everyone's talking about your courtship." "Are they?" Elara kept her voice light. "How tedious for them." "Not at all. It's the most entertainment we've had in years. A duke and a—" She paused delicately. "A blue stocking. So unexpected." "Life is full of surprises," Lucien said. His tone was mild, but something dangerous lurked beneath it. Some pleasant, some less so. Lady Ashcroft's smile tightened. "Indeed. I do hope Miss Whitcombe is prepared for the scrutiny that comes with your position, Your Grace. Not everyone is suited to such visibility." "I'm quite suited, thank you." Elara met her gaze directly. "I've spent 7 years observing society from the outside. I know exactly how it functions. And I know that women like you need women like me to fail because our success exposes how little you've actually accomplished." The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Ashcroft's face went white, then red, then something approaching purple. "How dare you?" "She dares because she's right." Lucien's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "You've spent 30 years enforcing rules designed to keep women powerless. Miss Whitcombe has spent 7 years building real solutions. The difference is notable." He guided Elara away before Lady Ashcroft could respond, leaving the older woman sputtering in their wake. "That was reckless," Elara hissed once they were out of earshot. "That was necessary. She needed to know you have teeth. She'll destroy me now." "She'll try, but she's just lost her primary weapon, your fear. And without that, she's just a bitter woman clinging to relevance. He steered them toward a quieter alcove. The Ashcroft ball is the day after tomorrow. After tonight, she'll spend every waking hour trying to sabotage you. Are you ready for that? No, but I'll manage anyway. Good. Because at that ball, I'm going to dance with you 3 times. I'm going to make it clear to everyone watching that I'm choosing you. And then, he paused, something shifting in his expression. Then I'm going to kiss you. Elara's breath caught. What? Not a dramatic kiss, nothing scandalous, just enough to make the intention unmistakable. His gray eyes held hers. Can you handle that? Her heart was racing, and she hated that he could probably see it. This wasn't part of the plan. Plans change. Society needs a clear signal. A kiss provides it. And my comfort with that doesn't matter? Of course it matters, which is why I'm asking now, giving you time to prepare. If you say no, we'll find another way. He stepped closer. But this is the fastest, cleanest path to making our engagement inevitable. Elara's mind spun. A kiss. In front of everyone. Not for love, for strategy, for theater, for the same reason actors kissed on stage to serve the narrative. Fine, she said, but if you make it theatrical, I'll kick you. His mouth twitched. Noted. The bell rang, calling them back to their seats. As they returned to the box, Elara caught sight of her reflection in a gilt mirror. Flushed cheeks, bright eyes, a woman who looked almost alive. She'd worn the emerald silk Madame Laurent had rushed to completion. She'd let her mother style her hair differently, pinning it up to expose her neck. She'd walked into this theater as someone new, and the terrifying part was how easy it had been. But the morning of the Ashcroft ball, a package arrived. Inside was a dress that made Elara's breath stop. Gold silk, just as Madame Laurent had promised, but nothing like she'd imagined. It shimmered in the light, cut in a style that was modern without being scandalous, elegant without being pretentious. The kind of dress that demanded to be noticed. A note lay on top. Wear this. Arrive at 8. And remember, you're not fighting for me. You're fighting for them. L.A. Her mother found her standing in her room, holding the dress like it might dissolve. Is that? Yes. It's beautiful. It's terrifying. Her mother crossed the room, taking the dress carefully and laying it on the bed. When I was your age, I wanted to matter too. I wanted to be more than just someone's wife, someone's mother. But I didn't have courage. I let fear make my choices. She smoothed the fabric. Don't make my mistakes, Elara. If this is what you want, if he's what you want, take it. Even if it's frightening, especially if it's frightening. What if I fail? Then you fail, but at least you'll have tried. Her mother's eyes were suspiciously bright. Now, let's make you into a duchess. The next 3 hours were dedicated to transformation. A bath with expensive oils. Hair styled by a professional her mother had somehow procured. Careful application of cosmetics, just enough to enhance, not enough to look desperate. And finally, the dress, laced and adjusted until it fit perfectly. When Elara looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize herself. The woman staring back was confident, striking. Someone who belonged at the Ashcroft ball, at the opera, in drawing rooms where decisions were made and power exchanged hands. You look like a duchess, her mother whispered. I look like an imposter. There's no difference. We're all imposters. Some of us just wear better costumes. The carriage arrived at 7:30. Lucien had sent his own vehicle, black lacquered wood, the Thornwick crest emblazoned on the door. A statement of ownership, of protection, of intent. The ride to the Ashcroft estate took 40 minutes. Elara spent them breathing carefully, reminding herself of everything she'd learned. Margaret's school, the 17 others, the hundreds of girls whose futures depended on her not collapsing under pressure. When they arrived, the ball was already in full swing. Light poured from every window. Music drifted into the night. And standing at the entrance, waiting, was Lucien. He wore formal black, stark and severe, and when his eyes met hers through the carriage window, something flickered in his expression that might have been surprise. He opened the door himself. Miss Whitcombe. Your Grace. You look... He stopped as though searching for words. Dangerous. Is that a compliment? The highest one I know. He offered his arm. Ready? She took it. No, but let's do this anyway. They walked through the doors together, and the ballroom fell silent. Every eye turned toward them. Every conversation died. Even the orchestra seemed to hesitate, the music faltering before recovering. Lady Ashcroft stood near the center of the room, her expression frozen somewhere between shock and fury. Beside her, Lord Ashcroft looked merely confused, as though he couldn't quite understand what he was seeing. Lucien led Elara directly across the floor, not hurrying, not hesitating, just moving with the absolute certainty of someone who owned every space he entered. "Lady Ashcroft," he said when they reached her, "thank you for the invitation. Lovely party."
"Your Grace." "Miss Whitcombe." Lady Ashcroft's voice was strangled. "We're so pleased you could attend."
"Wouldn't miss it." Lucian's hand tightened on Elara's arm. "Especially since I have an announcement to make." The room went impossibly quieter. "An announcement?" Lady Ashcroft's face was pale. "Later, after the first waltz." He turned to Elara. "Dance with me." Not a question, a command, or maybe a challenge. Elara let him lead her to the center of the floor. The orchestra, sensing the drama, launched into a waltz, something sweeping and dramatic. And then they were moving, and the world contracted to just the two of them. "You're trembling," Lucien murmured. "I'm angry." At? At having to perform like a trained animal. At knowing everyone here thinks I trapped you. At... She stopped, swallowing the rest. "At being afraid?" His hand was firm on her waist. "Don't be. They're not your enemy."
"Then who is?"
"You are. Every time you doubt yourself, you do their work for them." His gray eyes held hers. "Stop thinking. Just move." So she did. And somewhere between the second and third turn, something shifted. The trembling stopped. Her spine straightened. She stopped trying to remember the steps and just danced. And when the waltz ended, when the room erupted in polite applause, Lucien didn't release her immediately. Instead, he pulled her closer, just an inch, just enough, and tilted his head down. "Trust me," he whispered. Then he kissed her. It wasn't theatrical, wasn't dramatic, just a brief press of lips, firm and certain, that lasted maybe 3 seconds. But in those 3 seconds, Elara felt the entire ballroom hold its breath. When he pulled back, his expression was unreadable. "There. Now they know." "Know what?" "That you're mine." Before she could respond, he turned to face the crowd. His voice carried across the silent ballroom, steady and absolute. "I'm formally announcing my intention to court Miss Elara Whitcombe with the purpose of marriage. Anyone who has objections may address them to me, directly." No one spoke. No one dared. And in the terrible, perfect silence that followed, Elara realized something crucial. She'd just become the most dangerous woman in London. She'd just become the most dangerous woman in London. The realization settled over her like a second skin as Lucian's words echoed through the ballroom. The silence stretched, taut and terrible, until someone, Lord Pemberton, she thought, began clapping. Slowly, then faster. And suddenly the entire room erupted in applause that felt more like surrender than celebration. Lucien's hand remained on her waist. "Breathe," he murmured. "I am breathing." "No, you're holding your breath and hoping this ends quickly." His thumb pressed against her ribs, a gentle reminder. "It won't. So breathe." She did, a deep, shaky inhale that made her dizzy. Lady Ashcroft was staring at them with something approaching horror. Her mouth opened and closed twice before she managed words. "How unexpected, Your Grace. We had no idea you were considering such a significant step." "I don't announce my decisions until they're made." Lucien released Elara, but only to offer his arm again. "Miss Whitcombe and I will be formally engaged within the month. I trust everyone here will extend her the courtesy her new position demands." It wasn't a request. People nodded, murmured agreement, some with genuine warmth, most with the forced enthusiasm of courtiers who knew which way the wind was blowing. But Elara caught the other looks too. The calculation, the envy, the barely concealed rage from women who'd spent years positioning their daughters for this exact opportunity, only to watch it go to someone they'd dismissed as irrelevant. "Walk with me," Lucien said quietly. "Outside. Now." She let him guide her through the crowd, through the terrace doors, into the cool night air. Behind them, the ball resumed. Conversations exploding like fireworks, speculations flying, the entire social machinery grinding into motion to process this new reality. The terrace overlooked a garden lit by lanterns. Elara gripped the stone balustrade, trying to steady herself. That was necessary, Lucien finished, and effective. By tomorrow morning, every household in London will know. By tomorrow afternoon, the engagement will be treated as inevitable. No one will dare question it. Because they're afraid of you. Because they're practical. I have power. You're about to share it. That makes you untouchable. He stood beside her, not looking at her, but at the garden below. How do you feel? Sick, exhilarated, terrified. She laughed, and it came out shaky, like I just jumped off a cliff, and I'm not sure there's water at the bottom. There's water. I made sure of it. How can you be so certain? Because I've been planning this for 3 years. Every contingency, every possible attack, every way society might try to undermine you. He finally turned to face her. You're not falling, Miss Whitcombe. You're flying. There's a difference. The metaphor was too much. Everything was too much. The kiss, the announcement, the weight of 200 pairs of eyes watching her transform from invisible to essential in the span of one waltz. I need a moment, she said, alone. Take 5 minutes, then we go back inside, together. His expression softened fractionally. You did well tonight, better than I expected. Is that a compliment? The highest one I know. He left her there, disappearing back into the ballroom. Elara stood in the darkness, listening to the distant music, trying to understand what had just happened to her life. A rustle of silk behind her. She turned. Margaret Hartley stepped out of the shadows, wearing a simple but elegant blue dress. Miss Whitcombe, or should I say, future Duchess. Margaret, how did you? His Grace sent me an invitation, said I should witness this. Margaret's smile was radiant. He was right. That was magnificent. That was terrifying. Same thing, sometimes. Margaret moved closer, her voice dropping. Do you know what you just did? You took everything those women told you was impossible and claimed it anyway. You stood in front of everyone who dismissed you and said, I matter. That's not just brave, it's revolutionary. It's strategic. Lucien engineered the whole thing. So? You still had to execute it. You still had to stand there and take their scrutiny without flinching. Margaret grabbed her hands. The girls at St. Catherine's heard about this tonight. They're talking about nothing else. A woman like you, intelligent, uncompromising, willing to fight for what she believes, becoming a duchess? That changes everything for them. For all of us. Elara felt tears prick her eyes. I haven't done anything yet. You've survived. That's more than most women manage. Margaret squeezed her hands once more. Now go back inside and show them you're just getting started. When Elara returned to the ballroom 5 minutes later, the atmosphere had shifted. People no longer stared openly. Instead, they watched from the corners of their eyes, calculating, reassessing. She was no longer a curiosity. She was a force that required careful handling. Lucien appeared at her side immediately. Better? No, but functional. That's all we need. He gestured toward a cluster of women near the refreshment table. Lady Somerset. She's influential, politically moderate, and capable of civility. If we win her over, a dozen others will follow. And if we don't? Then we move to the next target. This is a campaign, Miss Whitcombe. We take ground where we can and retreat where we must. They approached Lady Somerset, who watched them with shrewd, calculating eyes. She was older, mid-50s, Elara guessed, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to respect. Your Grace, Miss Whitcombe. She inclined her head. Quite the announcement. Thank you for witnessing it, Lucien said. I'm not sure witnessing is the right word, more like experiencing a minor earthquake. Lady Somerset's gaze fixed on Elara. You're the philosopher, aren't you? The anonymous essayist who's been stirring up trouble in academic journals. Elara's stomach dropped. I don't know what you... Don't insult my intelligence. I've been reading those essays for 2 years. The writing is distinctive. And now that I'm looking at you properly, the connection is obvious. Lady Somerset's expression was unreadable. The question is whether the Duke knows. He knows, Lucian said calmly. He's known from the beginning. And you don't object? To your future wife publishing radical philosophy under a pseudonym? I encourage it. Her ideas are sound. Society needs them. Lady Somerset's eyebrows rose. Well, that's unexpected. She turned back to Elara. Your essay on educational reform, the one about training governesses in rhetoric and logic, I implemented parts of it at my estate. The results were remarkable. Elara blinked. You did? My granddaughter's governess now teaches her Socratic method alongside French. The child's ability to argue has improved dramatically. She's exhausting, but brilliant. Lady Somerset smiled. Your work has merit, Miss Whitcombe. Real, practical merit. That's rare. Thank you. The words came out strangled. Don't thank me. Prove me right. If you're going to be a duchess, be one who actually accomplishes something. Most of them just host parties and gossip. Lady Somerset glanced at Lucian. You've chosen well, Your Grace, assuming she doesn't collapse under the pressure. She won't, Lucian said. We'll see. Lady Somerset nodded once more and drifted away, leaving Elara standing there, stunned. That went well, Lucian murmured. She knows. About my writing. So do 3 other people in this room. I made sure of it, selected leaks to the right audiences. He guided her toward the dance floor. You can't be anonymous forever. Better to control the revelation than let someone else weaponize it. You're manipulating even this. I'm protecting you. There's a difference. The second waltz began. They danced again, and this time it felt almost normal. The scrutiny hadn't disappeared, but it had changed character. People were watching her differently now, not as a curiosity, but as someone who required understanding. Someone who might, impossibly, deserve the position she'd been granted. When the dance ended, a young woman Elara vaguely recognized approached them. Miss Whitcombe, may I speak with you? Lucien tensed, but Elara nodded. Of course. The woman was maybe 20, with nervous hands and a dress that was expensive but not quite fashionable. I'm Caroline Weatherby, Mrs. Weatherby's niece. I wanted to... She stopped, gathering courage. I wanted to apologize for my aunt, for what she said at the luncheon. It was cruel. It was honest, Elara said. She was asking what everyone else was thinking. Maybe, but she didn't have to be vicious about it. Caroline twisted her hands together. I read your essay, the one about women's economic independence. My aunt found it in my room and threw it in the fire. She said it would poison my mind. Did it? Yes, but in a good way. Caroline's smile was tentative. I've been trying to convince my father to let me study mathematics. He thinks it's pointless. But your essay gave me arguments, real ones, about practical applications and economic value. He's considering it now. Elara felt something crack open in her chest. Keep fighting for it. Don't let them convince you your interests don't matter. I won't. Because of you. Caroline glanced at Lucien. And because the most powerful man in England thinks you're worth listening to, that matters, more than you know. She curtsied and disappeared back into the crowd. Lucien was watching Elara with an expression she couldn't quite read. You're good at this. At what? Inspiring people. Making them believe they can be more than society allows. His voice was quiet. It's why I chose you. Not just for your ideas, but for this. The way people respond to you when you let them. I'm not inspiring. I'm just honest. In this world, that's the same thing. The third dance came and went. By the time midnight approached, Elara's feet ached and her face hurt from maintaining a careful, neutral expression. But something had shifted. People were approaching her now, not to challenge, but to engage, to ask questions about her work, her plans, her thoughts on education reform, and women's legal rights. It was exhausting and exhilarating and absolutely terrifying. When Lucy Sien finally guided her toward the exit, she felt like she'd survived a war. Tomorrow, he said as they waited for his carriage, we announced the formal engagement. I've already arranged for a notice in the Times. And next week you move into Thornwick House. Move in? Before the wedding? Separate wing, fully chaperoned. But we need to work closely, and constant travel between houses wastes time. His gaze was steady. Unless you object. Every rule of propriety said she should object. Unmarried women didn't live in men's houses, duchess-to-be or not, but propriety had never protected her before. I don't object. Good, because we have 17 schools to expand, 5 new ones to establish, and a legal reform campaign to launch before Parliament reconvenes. That's in addition to wedding planning, social obligations, and managing society's continued scrutiny. Is this what partnership looks like? Endless work?
Yes. Is that a problem? Elara thought about Margaret's school, about Caroline Weatherby fighting for mathematics,
About Lady Somerset implementing her ideas on her estate, about 37 letters and hundreds of lives changed. No, she said. It's not a problem. It's exactly what I want. The carriage arrived. Lucienne helped her inside, and they rode in silence through the dark London streets.
Elara watched the city pass, familiar and foreign at once. She'd walked these streets for 7 years, invisible and unnoticed. Now she was about to become one of the most visible women in England. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Always." "That kiss at the ball. Was it purely strategic?" Lucian was quiet for a long moment. "Does the answer matter?" "Yes." "Why?"
Because I need to know if you're capable of honesty. About everything, even the uncomfortable parts. He turned to look at her, and in the dim light from passing street lamps, his expression was unreadable. It was strategic, but it wasn't unpleasant. Is that honest enough? It was. Brutally, perfectly honest. "Yes," she said. "Thank you." "You're welcome. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow starts early, and I need you sharp." The announcement appeared in the Times the next morning, alongside a carefully worded statement about the Duke of Thornwick's courtship of Miss Elara Whitcombe, their shared intellectual interests, and his intention to marry within 6 weeks. By noon, the Whitcombe townhouse was flooded with callers. Elara's mother was in her element, serving tea and fielding questions with the skill of someone who'd waited 7 years for this exact moment. Elara sat in the drawing room, smiling until her face ached, as women who'd ignored her for years suddenly remembered they'd always liked her. "It's exhausting," she muttered to her mother during a brief lull. "It's necessary. Let them see you're gracious in victory." "I haven't won anything yet." "You've won everything that matters. Now consolidate it." The parade of visitors continued until 4 o'clock, when a footman announced the arrival of the Duke of Thornwick. Lucian strode into the drawing room like he owned it, nodded politely to the assembled women, and immediately claimed Elara's attention. "Miss Whitcombe, I need to borrow you." "For what?" "Urgent business. Come." He didn't wait for her agreement, just offered his hand. Elara took it, apologizing to her guests as Lucian swept her out of the house and into his waiting carriage. "That was rude," she said once they were moving. "That was necessary. You were about to snap. I could see it." "I was handling it." "You were enduring it. There's a difference." He handed her a folder. "These are the expansion plans for the schools. I need your opinion on curriculum structure before I meet with the board of directors next week." Elara opened the folder, grateful for something concrete to focus on. The plans were detailed. New schools in Manchester, Liverpool, and Bristol. Each one designed to provide not just basic education, but real intellectual training, logic, rhetoric, mathematics, science, everything society claimed women didn't need. "These are good," she said, scanning the documents. "But you're missing something." "What?" "Teacher training. You can build all the schools you want, but without qualified teachers who understand the methodology, they'll just replicate the same tired patterns." Lucian pulled out a second folder. "Already considered. Page 12. She flipped to it. "A comprehensive teacher training program, complete with salary structures, continuing education requirements, and mentorship protocols. You've thought of everything." "I've had 3 years, and I had your essays as a roadmap." He leaned back, watching her. "But this only works if you're actively involved. These women need to see you, to know you're real, not just some anonymous benefactor. Can you do that? Teach? Lead, inspire. Be the face of this movement while I work behind the scenes." His expression was serious. "I can fund it, but you have to build it, the way only you can." The weight of it was staggering, not just becoming a duchess, not just surviving society's scrutiny, but actually doing something, creating change, making her ideas real. "Yes," she said, "I can do that." "Good. Because next week, we're visiting the Manchester School. You're going to speak to the students, tell them why education matters, why thinking for themselves is worth fighting for. He pulled out another document. And this is the speech I've drafted. You can use it or write your own, your choice. Elara read the speech. It was good, clear, logical, compelling. Everything she would have written herself if she'd had the confidence. I'll write my own, she said, but I'll use parts of this. Fair, just make it powerful. These girls need to believe change is possible. They already believe it. They're attending these schools. Then make them believe they can be the ones who create change, not just benefit from it. The carriage pulled up outside Thornwick House. Elara stared at the massive building, trying to imagine living there. Your wing is on the east side, Lucienne said. 3 bedrooms, a study, a private sitting room. Your mother can visit whenever she likes, and there will be a maid assigned specifically to you. Any questions? When do I move in? Tomorrow. Madame Laurent is delivering your new wardrobe this afternoon. Pack your books, your papers, anything you need to work. Leave everything else. That's fast. We're announcing the wedding date next week, 6 weeks from Saturday. That doesn't leave much time for preparation. He helped her down from the carriage. Come, I'll show you the study. I think you'll like it. He was right. The study was perfect. Walls lined with books, a massive desk positioned near windows that overlooked the gardens, comfortable chairs arranged near a fireplace. It was everything she'd dreamed of and never thought she'd have. This is mine? She asked. Yours. To work, to write, to think. No one will disturb you without permission. Not even me. She turned to face him. Why are you doing this, really? It's not just about your sister. There's something else. Lucien was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. When I was 12, I wanted to study medicine. My father forbade it, said dukes didn't become physicians, that my duty was to the estate, the title, the family legacy. So I studied economics instead, learned to manage properties, investments, political alliances, became exactly what he wanted. He moved to the window, staring out at the gardens. And I hated every moment of it. But I was a man. I had power. I could fund my own interests, pursue knowledge in my spare time, use my position to support causes I believed in. Most people don't have that luxury, especially women. They're told what to want, how to think, who to be. And if they refuse, he stopped. They end up like my sister, or like you, invisible, dismissed, wasted. So this is about guilt. No, it's about rage. At a system that destroys brilliant minds because they happen to exist in the wrong body. At a society that values compliance over competence. He turned back to her. At the fact that you spent 7 years being told you didn't matter when you're more intelligent than half the men in Parliament. The admission hung in the air between them. Elara felt something shift. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. They were both angry, both fighting the same enemy, just from different positions. I won't waste this, she said quietly. The position you're giving me, I'll use it properly. I know, that's why I chose you. A knock interrupted them. Lucian's secretary appeared in the doorway. Your Grace, the appointment with Lord Ashford is in 15 minutes. I'll be there. Lucien turned back to Elara. I have to go. Make yourself comfortable. Explore the house. The library is particularly impressive. What should I tell my mother? That you're moving in tomorrow, that the wedding is 6 weeks away, and that she can stop worrying because you've just become one of the most powerful women in England. He left before she could respond. Elara stood alone in the study, surrounded by books and possibilities, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what had just happened to her life. 26 years of being invisible, 7 years of hoping for recognition, and now, impossibly, she had everything she'd wanted, except she hadn't wanted this. Not exactly. She'd wanted to matter, to contribute, to have her ideas taken seriously. But Duchess, partner to the most powerful man in England, face of a growing reform movement, that was something entirely different and terrifying and absolutely exhilarating. The Manchester School was larger than St. Catherine's, with 50 girls instead of 20.
When Elara walked in 2 weeks later, wearing a new navy dress and trying to project confidence she didn't feel, every student stood. "Your Grace," the headmistress began, but Elara stopped her. "Miss Whitcombe, I'm not a duchess yet, but you will be. And these girls should see you as you are now, one of them, who worked and fought and refused to accept limitations." Elara looked at the rows of young faces. Some couldn't be older than 8. Others were nearly women. All of them were watching her with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "I'm going to be honest with you," she said, abandoning the speech she'd prepared. "I was invisible for most of my life. I spent 7 years at balls and parties where no one noticed me. I wasn't pretty enough, rich enough, or quiet enough to matter. And I thought that was just how things were. That I'd live my whole life being overlooked, and eventually I'd die, and no one would remember I existed." The room was utterly silent. But I was wrong, because I had ideas, and I wrote them down. And some of those ideas reached people who needed them, women who felt as invisible as I did, women who thought they had no choices. She paused. "You're here because someone, His Grace, your teachers, maybe your own families, believed you deserved better than what society offered, better than being ornaments, better than silence." One girl raised her hand. "What if we fail? What if we learn all this and still end up as governesses or wives with no power?" "Then you fail as educated governesses, as wives who understand philosophy and mathematics, as women who can teach their own daughters to think critically." Elara leaned against the desk. "But honestly, I don't think you'll fail. I think you're going to be dangerous. The kind of dangerous that changes laws and reforms institutions and makes men in parliament very, very nervous." Laughter rippled through the room. Real laughter, not the polite tittering she'd endured at 100 society events. "I'm not going to tell you it'll be easy," Elara continued. "It won't be. You'll face mockery, resistance, people telling you to know your place. But here's what I learned. There is no place for women like us. We have to build it ourselves, and the more of us who refuse to accept limitations, the easier it becomes for the next generation." Another hand rose. "Are you scared of being a duchess?" "Terrified," Elara admitted, "every single day. But I'm more scared of going back to being invisible. So I keep moving forward, even when I want to run." The headmistress stepped forward. "Girls, Miss Whitcombe has also agreed to review your essays. She'll be selecting the best ones for publication in an educational journal His Grace is funding." Excited murmurs spread through the room. Elara felt Lucien's presence before she saw him. He'd been standing at the back of the classroom the entire time, watching. "That was better than the speech I wrote," he said quietly, when the girls returned to their lessons. "It was honest. They deserved that. You're a natural at this, at leading. I'm making it up as I go. So is everyone else. You're just more effective at it." He gestured toward the door. "Come. There's someone you need to meet." They walked through the building to a small office where a woman in her 40s sat surrounded by paperwork. She stood when they entered. "Your Grace, Miss Whitcombe. I'm Eleanor Fitzgerald. I run 3 schools in the North, 2 funded independently, one with His Grace's support." "Independently?" Elara asked. "I started with one student, teaching her in my kitchen after my husband died. She told her friends. They told theirs. Now I have 60 girls across 3 locations, learning everything from literacy to advanced mathematics." Eleanor's smile was tired, but genuine. "I heard about your work, your essays, and I wanted to ask if you'd consider coordinating the curriculum across all the schools His Grace funds. We're all teaching different things, moving at different paces. We need consistency, leadership." Terrace Basham. Elara glanced at Lucien. He nodded slightly. "I'd be honored," she said. "But I don't have experience with administration. Neither did I when I started. But you have something better, vision. And you understand what these girls need because you needed it yourself." Eleanor pulled out a map. "There are 23 schools now. His Grace funds 17. 6 others have started independently, inspired by the model. By next year, there could be 50. That's a movement, Miss Whitcombe, and it needs a leader." The scope of it was staggering. Elara looked at the map, at the dots scattered across England, each one representing dozens of girls learning to think, to question, to refuse the limitations society imposed. "All right," she said, "but I'm going to need help. I can't do this alone." "You won't be alone."
Eleanor handed her a folder. These are the other headmistresses. I've already written to them. They're waiting to hear from you. That night in the carriage back to London, Elara sat in silence, processing everything that had happened. You're quiet, Lucian observed. I'm overwhelmed. Good overwhelmed or bad overwhelmed? Both. I feel like I'm standing at the edge of something enormous, and I can't see the bottom. That's because you are. What we're building, it's not just schools. It's a fundamental shift in how society views women's capacity. That's the kind of change that takes decades. Generations, maybe. He leaned forward. But it has to start somewhere. And it's starting with you. What if I'm not enough? What if I can't? You are enough. You're more than enough. Stop doubting yourself and start acting like the leader everyone already sees when they look at you. The words were harsh, but they were also exactly what she needed to hear. Elara nodded, straightening her spine. All right, then let's do this properly. I want to visit every school, meet every headmistress, standardize the curriculum while still allowing for local adaptation. And I want to establish a teacher training program that's rigorous enough to produce real scholars, not just polite instructors. Done. And I want to start publishing openly. No more pseudonyms. If I'm going to lead this movement, people need to know who I am. That will make you a target. I'm already a target. At least this way, I'm a target who's being honest. Lucian smiled, really smiled, the kind that transformed his entire face. There she is, the woman I chose, dangerous, uncompromising, exactly what England needs. The carriage pulled up outside Thornwick House. Elara had been living there for 2 weeks now, and it was starting to feel almost normal. Her study was covered in papers, her shelves filled with books, her days consumed by planning and writing and building something that mattered. Tomorrow, Lucien said as they climbed the steps, we're announcing your first official act as future Duchess, a public lecture on women's education at the Royal Society. Elara stopped. The Royal Society doesn't allow women. They don't allow women members, but I'm on the board, and I've convinced them to permit a guest lecture. One evening, one chance to make your case to the most influential scholars in England. They'll destroy me. Probably. But you'll plant seeds, and some of those seeds will grow. He opened the door. You have 3 weeks to prepare, make it count. That night, alone in her study, Elara began writing the lecture that would either cement her position as a serious intellectual force or expose her as an imposter playing above her station. She wrote about Margaret Hartley's school, about Caroline Weatherby fighting for mathematics, about 50 girls in Manchester learning philosophy and science, about Eleanor Fitzgerald building a movement from her kitchen, about the 37 letters and the hundreds more that would follow. She wrote about invisibility and what it cost, about wasted potential and suppressed brilliance, about a society that valued compliance over competence and how much poorer everyone was because of it. And when she finished, as dawn light crept through the windows, she knew it was good. Not perfect, not unassailable, but real, honest, and powerful enough to matter. She just had to be brave enough to deliver it. The Royal Society lecture was scheduled for 3 weeks before the wedding. By then, Elara had moved through society with enough confidence that people had stopped questioning her position and started accepting it as inevitable. She was the Duke of Thornwick's chosen partner, the woman who'd gone from invisible to essential in the span of 2 months. The future Duchess, who had opinions and wasn't afraid to voice them. But standing backstage at the Royal Society, listening to the murmur of 200 scholars gathering in the auditorium, she felt the old fear creeping back. You're going to be brilliant, Lucien said. He stood beside her, perfectly calm, as though sending his future wife into a room full of skeptical male academics was a completely normal Tuesday evening activity. They're going to tear me apart. Some of them will. Others will listen. That's all you need, enough people willing to listen that the ideas take root. And if they don't, then we try again, and again, until they do. He adjusted her collar, a surprisingly intimate gesture. You've spent weeks preparing for this. You know your material better than anyone in that room. Trust yourself. A stage manager appeared. 5 minutes, Miss Whitcombe. Elara nodded, her throat tight. Lucien caught her hand. One more thing. No matter what happens tonight, no matter how they react, I'm proud of you. For trying, for refusing to hide, for being exactly who you are. The words landed like stones in water, sending ripples through her entire body. No one had ever said that to her before, No one had ever been proud of her simply for existing as herself. "Thank you," she managed. Then she walked onto the stage. The auditorium was packed. Rows of men in academic robes, fellows of the Royal Society, invited guests from Parliament and the aristocracy. And scattered among them, a handful of women, Margaret Hartley, Eleanor Fitzgerald, Lady Somerset, even Caroline Weatherby, sitting in the back row with defiant eyes. Elara took her position at the podium. The room fell silent. "Gentlemen, distinguished guests, I'm here tonight to argue that England is committing systematic intellectual suicide." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Every year, thousands of brilliant minds are born into female bodies. And every year, we waste them. We tell these minds they exist only to ornament drawing rooms, produce heirs, and maintain social order. We deny them education, opportunity, the chance to contribute anything meaningful beyond their bloodlines." Murmurs spread through the audience, some disapproving, some curious. "I know what you're thinking. Women aren't capable of rigorous intellectual work. Their minds are too emotional, too weak, too fundamentally different from men's." She smiled tightly. "Except there's no evidence for that. None. What we have is centuries of circular reasoning. We deny women education, then point to their lack of education as proof they don't need it." Someone in the front row stood. "Miss Whitcombe, are you suggesting women are identical to men?" "No. I'm suggesting that intellectual capacity isn't determined by sex, that a brilliant mind is brilliant regardless of the body it inhabits, and that excluding half the population from education and scholarship is pragmatically stupid, even if you don't care about fairness." Another man rose. "But women have different roles, domestic responsibilities, childbearing. So do most men. Parenting isn't solely a female occupation. Yet somehow men manage to be fathers and scholars simultaneously." She leaned forward. "The question isn't whether women can balance multiple roles. It's whether we're willing to let them try." For the next 40 minutes, Elara laid out her case. She cited examples of women who'd contributed to science, philosophy, and mathematics when given the chance. She described the schools already operating, the successes they'd achieved, the lives they'd transformed. She made economic arguments, social arguments, moral arguments. And slowly, gradually, she felt the room shift. Not everyone. A third of the audience remained hostile, arms crossed, faces set in disapproval. But others leaned forward, took notes, asked genuine questions instead of leading ones. When she finished, the applause was mixed, some enthusiastic, some grudging, some refusing to clap at all. But Lady Somerset stood. Then Margaret. Then Eleanor. Then Caroline. And one by one, other women in the audience rose, their applause growing louder, more defiant. And then something unexpected happened. A man in the second row stood, then another, then a dozen. Not all of them. Not even most. But enough that the message was clear. Some people had heard her. Some people were willing to consider that she might be right. Lucien appeared at her side as she left the stage, his expression carefully neutral. "Well? I don't know. Some people listened. Others walked out halfway through. The ones who listened are the ones who matter." He guided her toward the exit, where a small crowd had gathered. "And now you're going to talk to them. Answer their questions. Build alliances. This is how movements start, one conversation at a time." For the next hour, Elara discussed curriculum design with academics, answered skeptical questions from politicians, made connections with women who wanted to establish schools in their regions. She was exhausted, exhilarated, terrified, and absolutely alive. When they finally made it back to the carriage, she collapsed against the seat. "That was the hardest thing I've ever done." "That was just the beginning." Lucien settled across from her. "Tomorrow, the reviews will start appearing, some favorable, some vicious. And then you get to do it again. Different audience, different arguments, same goal. When does it get easier? Never. But you get better at handling the difficult parts." Elara closed her eyes, letting the exhaustion wash over her. 2 months ago, she'd been invisible. Now she was speaking at the Royal Society, coordinating a network of schools, preparing to become a duchess. And the strangest part was how much of it felt natural. Not easy, but right. Like she'd finally found the role she was meant to play. 3 weeks until the wedding, Lucien said quietly. "Are you ready?" She opened her eyes. "For the wedding or for everything that comes after?" "Both. No. but I'll do it anyway." His smile was small but genuine. That's all anyone can ask. When they reached Thornwick House, Elara went straight to her study. There was work to do, responses to write, schools to coordinate, a movement to build. But first she allowed herself one moment to sit in the dark, surrounded by books and possibilities, and acknowledge the truth. She'd stopped being invisible, and she was never going back. She was never going back. The thought stayed with her through the night, through the morning that followed, through the dozens of reviews that appeared in newspapers and journals over the next week. Some praised her lecture as revolutionary. Others dismissed her as a radical puppet manipulated by the Duke of Thornwick. A particularly vicious editorial in the Morning Chronicle suggested she was dangerous, not because her ideas were wrong, but because they might actually work. "You've made enemies," her mother said, reading the Chronicle article with trembling hands. "Real ones, people with power." Good. Elara sat at her desk, surrounded by correspondence from 17 schools. "That means they're taking me seriously." "This isn't a game, Elara. These people could destroy you." "They could try." She signed another letter, her handwriting steady. "But I'm about to become a duchess. That gives me protection most women never get. I'd be a fool not to use it." Her mother set down the paper, studying her daughter with something between pride and fear. "You've changed. In 2 months, you've become someone I barely recognize." "No, I've just stopped pretending to be someone I'm not." "And that doesn't frighten you?" "It terrifies me. Every single day." Elara looked up, but not as much as the alternative. The wedding was 2 weeks away. The guest list had swelled to 300, half of London society, members of parliament, foreign dignitaries, and tucked among them, every headmistress from every school in their growing network. Lucien had insisted on it, over the objections of his steward and half the aristocracy. "If we're building something new," he'd said, "then everyone needs to see it, including the women who make it possible." Now, standing in Madame Laurent's fitting room for the final dress adjustment, Elara stared at her reflection and tried to recognize the woman looking back. The wedding gown was ivory silk, elegant without being ostentatious, modern without being scandalous. It fit perfectly. And she looked beautiful, Madame Laurent said firmly. "You look like a duchess." "I look like I'm playing dress-up. That's what everyone feels before their wedding, even duchesses." The modiste adjusted a seam. "But you, Miss Whitcombe, you've earned this. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." That night, Lucy Zien found her in the library, surrounded by books she'd been cataloging for a research project. "You're working," he observed. "I'm always working. So are you." "Fair." He sat across from her, holding a letter. "This arrived today, from Cambridge. They're considering opening their lectures to women, not as full students, not yet, but as auditors. It's a start." Elara set down her pen. "Because of the lecture? Because of you. Your arguments, your evidence, the schools we've built. People are watching what we do. And some of them are starting to believe change is possible. Only some. Some is enough. Some becomes many. Many becomes normal." He handed her the letter. "This is what success looks like. Not universal acceptance, just enough momentum that the tide shifts." She read the letter twice, trying to absorb the magnitude of it. Cambridge, one of the oldest, most prestigious institutions in England, considering women. "We should celebrate," she said. "We should, but first..." He pulled out another document. "The marriage contract, final version. I need you to read it carefully before you sign." Elara took the contract, scanning the pages. It was unusual, extremely unusual. Instead of the standard provisions about property and obedience, it outlined partnership terms, joint decision-making on the schools, separate accounts for her personal use, legal protection for any intellectual property she created, and most shocking of all, a clause specifying that she retained the right to publish under her own name, without his permission or approval. "This isn't a marriage contract," she said slowly. "This is a business partnership with ceremonial elements." "Yes, is that a problem?" "No, it's just..." She looked up at him. "You're giving me more freedom than most women ever get." "Why?" "Because binding you would be pointless. You'd fight it until one of us broke. And I need you whole, not broken." He leaned forward. "Sign it or don't. But understand what you're agreeing to. Not just the ceremony, the work, the scrutiny, The constant battle to prove we're right about everything we're building. Elara picked up the pen. Her hand hovered over the signature line for just a moment. Then she signed. Good, Lucian said. Because starting tomorrow, we have a problem to handle. What problem? Lord Pemberton is introducing a bill in Parliament to restrict women's education. He's specifically citing our schools as evidence that educating women leads to social instability. We need to stop him. How? By proving him wrong, publicly, definitively. Lucian stood. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we go to war. But sleep didn't come. Elara lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Lord Pemberton and his bill, and the fact that success had made them visible enough to become targets. Somewhere in London, in 17 different schools, girls were learning to think, to question, to refuse the limitations society imposed. And now someone wanted to take that away. She wouldn't let them. The parliamentary hearing was scheduled for 3 days before the wedding. Lucian had secured testimony slots for both of them, over Lord Pemberton's strenuous objections. This is irregular, Pemberton protested when they arrived at Westminster. Women don't testify before Parliament. They do now, Lucian said calmly. Unless you'd like to explain to the Queen why you're preventing a future Duchess from addressing concerns about her own charitable work. Pemberton's face went red, but he backed down. The hearing room was smaller than Elara expected, wood-paneled, austere, filled with 20 male legislators who watched her enter with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Miss Whitcombe, the chairman began, you understand you're here to address concerns about the schools you and His Grace have established? I understand you're concerned about educated women, which says more about your insecurities than our schools. The room went silent. The chairman's eyebrows shot up. That's quite a statement. It's an observation. Lord Pemberton claims our schools promote social instability, but what he means is that educated women are harder to control, which is true. It's also the entire point. Pemberton stood. This is exactly the kind of radical rhetoric. Let her speak, another legislator interrupted. I want to hear what she has to say. Elara took a breath. Our schools teach reading, writing, mathematics, logic, and philosophy. The same subjects taught at Eton and Cambridge. If those subjects promote instability when taught to women but not to men, then either the subjects are the problem, which would require closing Eton, or your objection isn't about the curriculum. It's about who's learning. Women have different roles, Pemberton argued. Domestic responsibilities. They don't need advanced education to raise children and manage households. And men don't need it to inherit estates and vote in Parliament, yet they get it anyway. Elara leaned forward. Education isn't about need, it's about capacity. And women have the same capacity as men to think, to reason, to contribute meaningfully to society. Denying them education doesn't protect anything except your monopoly on power. These schools of yours, another legislator said, what are you teaching exactly? Critical thinking, how to analyze arguments, how to identify logical fallacies, how to distinguish evidence from opinion. She paused. Ironically, those are the exact skills that would help people evaluate whether Lord Pemberton's bill is based on legitimate concerns or unfounded fear. Several legislators chuckled. Pemberton's face darkened. You're teaching them to be rebels, he spat. I'm teaching them to be scholars. If that makes them rebels in your eyes, perhaps you should examine what you're defending. For the next hour, Elara fielded questions, some hostile, some genuine, all designed to test whether she actually understood what she was talking about or was just parroting Lucian's ideas. She held her ground, cited research, provided examples, described specific students and their achievements, and slowly, grudgingly, she watched some of the skepticism fade. When Lucian took the stand afterward, he was characteristically direct. Gentlemen, I'm not asking you to approve of what we're doing. I'm informing you it's happening, with or without parliamentary blessing. The question is whether you want to be part of progress or remembered as the ones who tried to stop it. That sounds like a threat, Pemberton said. It's a prediction. Social change doesn't wait for permission. It happens when enough people decide the old way isn't working anymore. And right now, thousands of women across England are reaching that conclusion. Lucian's voice was steady. You can try to legislate that away, but you'll fail, and you'll look like fools doing it. The chairman called for a vote. The bill was defeated, narrowly, by a margin of 2 votes. Outside in the cold afternoon air, Elara felt her knees go weak.
That was too close, she said. That was a warning shot. They'll try again. Lucian guided her toward his carriage. But we bought time, and we proved something important. What? That you can hold your own against the most powerful men in England, without my help. Without anyone's help. He smiled slightly. They expected a puppet. They got a force of nature. That's going to haunt them.
2 days later, an editorial appeared in the Times, written by one of the legislators who'd voted against Pemberton's bill. It argued, carefully but clearly, that education for women might not be as dangerous as some feared, that the schools Miss Whitcombe and the Duke of Thornwick had established showed promising results, that perhaps it was time to consider expanding opportunities cautiously, with proper oversight. It wasn't a victory, but it was movement.
Some becomes many, Lucian said when she showed him the editorial. Many becomes normal. And then what?
Then we build something that lasts. The wedding morning arrived gray and cold, typical English spring weather that couldn't decide between rain and sun.
Elara stood in her room at Thornwick House, watching servants rush through final preparations while her mother fussed with her dress and Margaret helped arrange her hair. You look terrified, Margaret observed. I am terrified. Good. That means you understand what you're doing. Margaret pinned another curl into place. 7 years ago, I was about to marry a man who saw me as property. Your essay gave me the courage to refuse, to choose myself instead. And now you're choosing yourself too, just in a different way. I'm not sure marrying a duke counts as choosing myself. You're choosing partnership over subordination, purpose over comfort. That's brave, Elara. Don't diminish it. Her mother appeared with the veil, delicate lace that had belonged to Lucian's mother. It's time. The ceremony was held at St. Paul's Cathedral because apparently when a duke married, it required the largest church in London. 300 guests filled the pews, and as Elara walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she saw them all watching, judging, calculating.
But she also saw Margaret and Eleanor and Lady Somerset and Caroline Weatherby and dozens of other women whose lives had intersected with hers over the past 3 months. Women who'd written to her, studied under her, fought alongside her. Women who believed the world could change because she'd shown them it was possible. Lucian stood at the altar, perfectly composed. When she reached him, he took her hand and she felt the steady warmth of his grip. The ceremony was traditional, vows about loyalty and partnership, blessings about prosperity and children. Elara said the words, meaning some of them, knowing the rest would grow meaning with time. When the priest pronounced them married, Lucian kissed her. Brief, formal. But there was something in it that felt almost like promise. They walked back down the aisle together as the Duke and Duchess of Thornwick. Outside, crowds had gathered, curious Londoners hoping to glimpse the famous couple, the Duke who'd married a spinster, the woman who'd gone from invisible to essential in 3 months. Elara stood on the cathedral steps, Lucian beside her, and looked at the sea of faces.
Overwhelming, he murmured. Completely. Good. Let them see you like this, real, human, not some distant aristocrat they can't imagine speaking to. So she did. She smiled, waved, let herself be seen, and when someone in the crowd shouted, "Congratulations, Your Grace," she felt the title settle over her shoulders like armor.
The reception at Thornwick House lasted 6 hours. Dancing, speeches, endless toasts to the happy couple. Elara moved through it mechanically, playing the role of gracious bride while her mind was already racing ahead to the work waiting. Late in the evening, Lady Somerset cornered her near the terrace. "You pulled it off," the older woman said. "I wasn't sure you would." The wedding? Everything. Becoming someone who matters, forcing society to take you seriously. Lady Somerset sipped her champagne. "I've been watching you, Duchess, wondering if you'd collapse under the pressure. But you haven't. You've grown sharper, stronger. I'm still terrified most of the time. All strong women are. That's what makes us careful." Lady Somerset set down her glass. "I'm establishing a school on my estate for girls from my tenants' families. I want you to design the curriculum." Elara blinked. "You're serious?" "Completely. I've watched what you've built. The results speak for themselves. My granddaughter is proof." She smiled slightly. "Besides, if a duchess can champion education reform, perhaps a countess can too. Strength in numbers." I'd be honored. Good. Come visit next month. We'll discuss details. Lady Somerset paused. And Elara? Thank you for showing us what's possible. She disappeared back into the crowd, leaving Elara standing alone on the terrace, processing what had just happened. Lucien found her there an hour later, after most guests had departed. You're hiding, he observed. I'm thinking. About? How strange this is. 3 months ago, I was nobody. Now I'm a duchess with people asking me to design school curricula. She turned to face him. Does it always happen this fast? Change? No. Usually it takes years, decades. We just compress the timeline. He joined her at the railing. Are you all right? I don't know. Everything feels precarious, like I'm standing on something that could collapse any moment. That's because you are. We both are. What we're building, it's revolutionary. And revolutions are inherently unstable until they solidify into new norms. He was quiet for a moment. But you're not alone in this. Whatever comes next, we face it together. As partners. As partners. They stood in silence, watching London spread out below them, lights flickering in windows across the city. Somewhere out there, in 17 schools and counting, girls were learning to think, to question, to imagine futures beyond what society allowed. And tomorrow, the work would continue. 6 months after the wedding, Elara stood in the House of Commons gallery, watching as Parliament debated a new education reform bill. This one, unlike Pemberton's, proposed expanding opportunities for women's education. Not universally, not dramatically, but enough to legitimize what she and Lucien had been building. The vote was close, but it passed. Beside her, Margaret squeezed her hand. You did this. We did this. All of us. You started it. You gave us permission to imagine something different. That evening, Elara returned to Thornwick House and went straight to her study. It had become her sanctuary, walls lined with books, desk covered in correspondence from 32 schools now, windows overlooking the gardens where she and Lucien sometimes walked in the evenings, discussing strategy and philosophy and the exhausting work of changing the world. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Lucien entered carrying a letter. From Cambridge, he said. They're opening a women's college. Limited enrollment, strict oversight, but it's real, and they want you on the board of directors. Elara took the letter, reading it twice to make sure she understood. This is historic, unprecedented, exactly what we've been working toward. He sat across from her. You'll say yes, obviously. Obviously, but Lucien, she set down the letter. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air between them. She'd known for 2 weeks, confirmed by a physician, but hadn't found the right moment to tell him until now. Lucien's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. How do you feel about that? Terrified? Excited? Worried it'll slow down everything we're building? She took a breath. But also ready, I think. You'll keep working. You'll eat. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. Yes, women have been having babies and doing important work for centuries. Society just pretends we can't do both. Good, because I need you sharp. The Cambridge position is just the beginning. There are 3 more universities considering similar programs, and Parliament is drafting legislation about women's property rights. They'll want your input. Even while pregnant, especially while pregnant, you'll be proof that motherhood and intellectual work aren't mutually exclusive. Over the following months, Elara did exactly that. She designed curriculum for Cambridge's new women's college while her body changed and grew. She testified before parliamentary committees with her pregnancy visible to everyone, refusing to pretend it made her less capable. She wrote essays about education reform and maternal philosophy and the false choice society forced on women between motherhood and meaningful work. And slowly, grudgingly, people started listening. The baby was born on a gray March morning, after 14 hours of labor that Elara spent mentally cataloging everything wrong with contemporary medical practices regarding childbirth. You're impossible, the physician muttered as she argued with him about forceps usage between contractions. I'm informed. There's a difference. When her daughter finally arrived, small, red, screaming with impressive lung capacity, Elara felt something shift fundamentally inside her. Not softening, exactly, but expanding, making room for this new person while still remaining herself. "She's perfect," her mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She's furious," Elara corrected, "and loud. She'll fit right in." Lucien entered an hour later, after the physician and midwife had finished their work. He approached the bed carefully, studying the baby with the same analytical intensity he brought to everything. "She has your eyes," he said finally. "She has my temper, too, judging by the screaming." "Good. She'll need it." He sat on the edge of the bed. "Have you chosen a name?" "Catherine, after St. Catherine's School, where this all started." "Catherine Ashford." He tested the name. "Future troublemaker." "Absolutely." That night, alone with her daughter while Lucien handled the flood of congratulatory visitors, Elara looked at the tiny face and felt the weight of everything she'd built, settling into something permanent. This child would grow up in a world where women could attend Cambridge, where girls learned philosophy alongside embroidery, where being intelligent wasn't a liability but an asset. Not a perfect world, not an equal one, not yet, but better than the one Elara had inherited. And that mattered. 2 years later, Elara stood at the front of Cambridge's first women's college, addressing the inaugural class of 40 students. Catherine was with her, 18 months old now, playing quietly with blocks in the corner while her mother spoke. Some people had objected to bringing a toddler to such a significant event. Elara had ignored them. "You're here because someone believed you deserved this opportunity," she told the students. "A parent, a teacher, maybe yourselves. But you're also here because dozens of women fought to make this possible. Women who were told no and refused to accept it. Women who built schools in kitchens and back rooms. Women who testified before Parliament and wrote essays and stood in front of hostile audiences and insisted that your minds mattered." She paused, letting the words settle. "Now it's your turn. You have resources we didn't have, legitimacy we had to fight for, protection we couldn't imagine. Use them. Study hard. Think critically. Question everything, especially the things I'm telling you right now, and then go build something better than what we've given you." The applause was enthusiastic. Afterward, students clustered around her, asking questions, seeking advice, treating her not as a distant duchess, but as someone who understood their struggles because she'd lived them. Margaret appeared at her elbow. "You were brilliant, as usual." "I'm exhausted, as usual." "That's what happens when you change the world. It's tiring." Margaret picked up Catherine, who immediately tried to grab her glasses. "But you're doing it, actually doing it. There are 63 schools now, 3 universities accepting women, a dozen legislative reforms. That's because of you. It's because of us, all of us. You started it. Don't diminish that." On the carriage ride back to London, with Catherine asleep against her shoulder and Lucien reading correspondence across from her, Elara let herself feel the exhaustion, the constant pressure, the endless work, but also the satisfaction. "What are you thinking?" Lucien asked. "That 7 years ago I was invisible. And now I'm sitting in a carriage with my husband and daughter, having just addressed Cambridge's first female students, and planning testimony for next week's Parliament session on women's property rights. And it's overwhelming, but it's also exactly what I wanted, even when I didn't know how to want it." "Any regrets?" She thought about it honestly, about the attacks in newspapers, the social ostracism from certain circles, the constant scrutiny, the exhaustion of fighting battles every single day. "No," she said finally. "No regrets." "Good, because next month Oxford is announcing their women's college, and they want you involved." Elara laughed. Tired, genuine laughter. "Of course they do. Can you handle it?" She looked at Catherine, sleeping peacefully. At Lucien, watching her with quiet respect. At the papers scattered across the carriage seat, each one representing another school, another reform, another girl learning to think for herself. "Yes," she said, "I can handle it." 5 years after that Cambridge speech, on a warm June afternoon, Elara stood in the gardens at Thornwick House, watching Catherine play with the daughters of women who'd attended those early schools. Margaret's daughter, Eleanor's niece, Caroline Weatherby's sister, all of them running through the roses, shrieking with laughter, completely unaware they were living in a world their mothers had built from nothing. Lady Somerset appeared beside her, older now, but still sharp. "They don't know how lucky they are." "They shouldn't have to know. That's the point." Elara watched Catherine, 6 years old now, already reading philosophy texts meant for older children, already asking questions that made adults uncomfortable. We fought so they wouldn't have to. But they will have to fight. Different battles, maybe. But the work isn't finished. No, it never is. Elara turned to face her. But that's all right. We gave them tools, education, confidence, the knowledge that they're allowed to take up space in the world. What they do with it is up to them. Lucienne joined them, carrying reports from the latest school expansions. 87 schools now, across England and Scotland. 2 women's colleges at Cambridge, 1 at Oxford. Legal reforms protecting women's property, employment rights, access to divorce. Not enough. Never enough. But more than anyone had thought possible a decade ago. The Queen wants to meet with you, he said, about establishing a royal commission on women's education. The Queen herself? She's been watching what we've built. She has daughters. She wants them educated properly. He paused. This could mean Crown support, official endorsement, everything we've been working toward. Elara looked at the girls playing in the garden. At the house behind her, filled with correspondence from women across England asking for help, for advice, for the courage to keep fighting. At the man beside her who'd given her the platform to do this work but never once tried to control how she used it. All right, she said, let's meet with the Queen. That night, after Catherine was in bed and the house had quieted, Elara returned to her study. She sat at the desk where she'd written her first anonymous essays, where she'd planned curriculum for schools that didn't exist yet, where she'd drafted testimony and speeches and manifestos. And she started writing again. Not for publication, not for testimony, just for herself. 7 years ago, I was invisible. Society had decided I didn't matter, too old, too plain, too opinionated to deserve attention. And I believed them. I let their judgment define my worth. But then someone saw me anyway. Not because I'd changed, but because he was looking for something different than what society valued. And he offered me a choice. Stay invisible and safe, or become visible and fight. I chose to fight. And it was harder than I imagined. Scarier, more exhausting. I've been attacked, mocked, dismissed as a radical or a fool or a puppet. I failed more times than I can count. Made mistakes, lost battles. But I've also won some. And the winning matters, not for me, but for the girls who'll come after. The ones who won't have to fight quite as hard because we fought first. Who'll take opportunities we created and build something even better. That's what legacy means. Not perfection, not universal acceptance, just making the world a little less hostile for the next generation of women who refuse to be small. She stopped writing, reading back what she'd written. It was honest, raw. Nothing like the careful public rhetoric she'd learned to craft. But it was true. And maybe someday, when Catherine was older, she'd read it and understand. Understand that her mother hadn't been fearless, just determined. That revolution wasn't about certainty, but about refusing to stop even when terrified. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Lucienne stood in the doorway. Working late again? Thinking, there's a difference. May I? He gestured to the chair across from her desk. She nodded. He sat, and they stayed like that for a while, comfortable in silence. It had taken years, but they'd built something real. Not the passionate romance her mother had hoped for. Something steadier, deeper. Partnership that had grown into genuine affection, respect that had deepened into trust. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Choosing me instead of someone easier? No. He said it without hesitation. You were never meant to be easy. You were meant to be extraordinary. And you are. Even when I'm difficult? Especially then. She smiled. We've done good work together. We have. And we'll do more. He stood, crossing to look out the window at the darkened gardens. Our daughter will grow up believing she can do anything, that education is her right, not a privilege, that her mind matters as much as any man's. Because you made that world for her. We made that world. You started it. I just provided resources. That's not... She stopped, because arguing felt pointless. They'd had this debate dozens of times, and they both knew the truth. It had taken both of them, his power, her vision, his protection, her courage. Neither could have done it alone. Thank you, she said instead, for seeing me when no one else did, for giving me the chance to matter. You always mattered. I just gave you a platform big enough that people couldn't ignore it anymore. He turned back to face her. And you took that platform and built something I never imagined, something better than my original plan. Because you let me. You could have controlled everything. Instead, you trusted me. Because you were trustworthy. Are trustworthy. He moved closer. Whatever comes next, the Queen's Commission, Oxford's expansion, the next legislative battle, we face it together, as we always have. As we always will. They stood there, two people who'd chosen partnership over passion, strategy over sentiment, and somehow built both something revolutionary and something lasting. Outside, London slept. But in 17 schools across England, night classes were running. Women learning to read by lamplight after spending days working as servants or factory workers. Girls studying mathematics in attics and philosophy in kitchens. Thousands of minds refusing to accept the limitations society imposed. And in Cambridge and Oxford, female students were preparing for exams that would prove definitively that women's intellectual capacity matched men's. The world was changing, slowly, imperfectly, but undeniably. And Elara had been part of making it happen, not because she was perfect, not because she never doubted or failed or wanted to give up, but because she'd chosen, again and again, to keep fighting, to stay visible even when it was terrifying, to believe that her ideas mattered enough to risk everything for them. 7 years ago, she'd been invisible. Now she was the Duchess of Thornwick, a mother, an education reformer, a philosopher, a woman whose name was mentioned in parliamentary debates and academic journals and whispered conversations between mothers and daughters about what might be possible. She was no longer invisible, and she'd made sure no woman who came after her would have to be invisible either. That was enough. That was everything. She closed her journal, extinguished the lamp, and went upstairs to where her family slept. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new challenges, new opportunities to push the world a little further toward justice. But tonight, she allowed herself to rest, because the woman who'd once been nothing had become someone who'd changed everything. And that story, her story, was far from over. It was just beginning.